Yo Shinobi fam, welcome back to Just a Shinobi. Today, we're diving into one of the wildest what-ifs. What if Naruto's secretly overpowered? Part 2. Hope you loved first part. So buckle up for some serious action and twists. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button for more mind-blowing Naruto scenarios. Check out the other videos on the channel, share them with your ninja squad, and don't forget to drop your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps this shinobi going strong. Omega 3 and identity revealed. Naruto was humming happily to himself. He had just completed another fruitful day of training with the Akimichi, and because the clan head family had to go to some fancy meeting or other, he was left to take care of his own dinner, which meant Ichiraku's. Oh, it had been too long for the young blonde since he had sampled the greatest gift the gods above had graciously seen fit to send down to their unworthy mortal world. And he wasn't talking about those small, bite-sized portions the Akimichi matriarch forced him to eat either. No sir, he was a young boy. He needed his delicious ramen to grow tall and strong, didn't he? About 7 or 8 bowls should do. His face stretched into a wide grin, showing off 2 large canines as the heavenly aroma of the best food in the world hit his nostrils. With a great swing of his arm, he flung away the flap that hung in front of the ramen shop. His eyes closed in happiness as he announced his presence to the people inside and everybody outside of the shop as well. Good evening, old man Tucci. I am Hiruzen. The usual please. Let's start off with 3 bowls and see where the night takes us, shall we? Rumbling laughter met his ears as he walked to his seat in front of the counter, coming right up Gaki. Though, for sake of the well-being of both myself and that of my shop, I have to ask, will there be any irate Akimichi mothers showing up on my doorstep, demanding my head for feeding you too much? Naruto waved away the old chef's concern away with an impatient hand, taking his seat and reaching for a nearby pair of chopsticks. Meh, Choji and his parents had to go out of town for tonight, so I can eat all I want, Dadabayo. He looked up with a grin as he heard Tucci laugh at that, before the chopsticks clattered out of his hand, his mouth falling open in shock. Old man, where's your arm? Interlude 1. The Chef and the Monkey. It was during the final days of the Second Shinobi World War, and Konoha had just received a great hit. It wasn't a loss of territory or manpower, though those had suffered as well, but one of reputation. And in the ninja world, reputation could easily mean the difference between victory and defeat. A strike force of Konoha shinobi had invaded the Land of Rain, but had met its gruesome end at the hands of the legendary ninja Hanzo the Salamander, leaving only 3 survivors, who would ever after be known as the Sannin, the finest shinobi of their generation. Hanzo was one of the strongest shinobi of his age, a truly impressive feat considering his lifetime saw many other living legends, such as the Third Raikage, who was thought to be invincible before he fell under an assault of 10,000 enemy shinobi that lasted 3 days and 3 nights, allowing his comrades to escape to safety. Or the Third Tsuchikage, who had an extremely powerful Keki Aitoda, the dust release, which he had used to wipe away enemy armies and cities alike, with the ease of blowing away sand in the wind. And of course, Konoha's third Hokage himself, the teacher of Jiraiya, the Toad Sage, who in turn would teach the Yellow Flash, Namake's Minato, the deadliest ninja of his time. Sarutobi Hiruzen had been apprenticed to the Senju brothers themselves, and chosen successor of Hashirama Senju, the greatest shinobi to have ever lived, even having inherited the title God of Shinobi from his mentor for his combat prowess. Together with Enma, the Monkey King, there was no foe who could duel the powerful Sarutobi in personal combat, his strikes too fast to dodge, too powerful to block, his ninjutsu flawless and destructive enough that he had no equal when it came to destroying the enemy with the very elements of nature itself. But he had yet more to offer. He was also called the Professor, due to his working knowledge of nearly all ninja disciplines, more than a few of which most ninja had never even heard of, and sometimes more extensive than those who proclaimed themselves experts in their fields. No matter what tactic you used, Hiruzen Sarutobi would already have a counter-strategy already in place. No matter what special jutsu you inherited or invented, chances were Hiruzen Sarutobi knew more about its mysteries and intricacies than you did. No, for all that the mere sight of him and his unbreakable staff instilled fear and defeat in Konoha's enemies, it was his mind that was the terror of the other nations, for surely he understood their inner workings and hidden secrets even better than they did. He was, after all, the Professor. It had been a hard-earned title, and one Hiruzen took great pride in, having worked almost every waking hour on doing it justice, studying by the light of candles and the sun alike. He understood the nature around him, he understood the people that inhabited that world alongside him, he knew what made the earth go round and his fellow humans tick. So it was a very rare occasion when Hiruzen found himself truly surprised anymore. But that's just what happened during the final stages of the war. He was in some small, unnamed village in a heavily contested border country between Kumo and Konoha, the ever hot-headed Raikage taking Konoha's loss at the hands of Hanzo the Salamander as a sign of weakness. The fact that Konoha had gained 3 more legends to its impressive roster had not been enough to dissuade the near-indestructible man from his aggressive course. After all, they were untested, and their legends, though hard-earned with both sweat and blood, had yet to grow to match their prowess. Unfortunately, Hiruzen couldn't call upon most of his legendary warriors to contest the challenge that the Raikage had made by overtaking one of their vassal territories. Jiraiya was still in the country of rain, doing Kami knows what. Tsunade had turned her back on being a shinobi after the death of her lover, yet another heavy blow to Konoha's power and reputation. And Orochimaru. Orochimaru had been changed by the war that plagued them. Then again, weren't they all? Minato Namikaze was a prodigy, true, but not yet old or powerful enough to send to the stage of war. There was also Hatake Tsukumo, the white fang of Konoha, but he was off on mission that was vital to the survival of Konoha, and could not be spared for a border dispute, no matter how important that dispute may be, which was why it was Hiruzen himself that was standing in the rain on a torn-up field, his trusty friend Enma standing beside him, and in front of them was probably the strangest sight either of them had ever seen. The Land of Flowers had no ninja village of their own, since their numbers were too small in order to maintain one, forcing them to usually hire shinobi from their ally Konoha. However, that didn't mean that they didn't have any ninja at all. It was simply a result of all the major clans grouping together to form the various shinobi villages, that the unaffiliated ninja of the minor lands were overall weaker than those of the major villages, simply because they had no clans or academy to fall back on in order to strengthen their skills. So it was definitely an odd thing to see a single shinobi from a minor land hold his own against a group of ninjas from not one, but 2 major villages. With his bare hands, a lone man stood in front of a small wooden house, his clothes stained with blood, as he was surrounded by ninja wearing headbands from both Kumo and Konoha. The enemy forces traded a few confused glances at their odd impromptu team-up, before focusing on the bigger threat. At the man's feet was a small mound of dead shinobi, all of them with caved-in skulls or chests. The man himself, looking more like a civilian instead of a deadly ninja, if not for all the blood covering him, stood with his back towards the house, his eyes flitting from one enemy to the next, his fists raised in front of him. Even as Hiruzen watched, a Kumo shinobi flashed through a couple of hand seals, before holding out both hands towards the lone man, his arms outstretched and his fingers curled into claws. Hiruzen knew what was coming, of course, once again doing his title as the Professor justice. A veritable lightning storm would fly from the shinobi's fingertips, and while at lower settings it wasn't immediately lethal, it was extremely painful and paralyzed the target. Lightning began to build up around the Kumo shinobi's hands, while the scent of ozone filled the air. Crack! Before the lone man shinobi? Civilian? Samurai? Blurred to the enemy shinobi's side, his hands flashing out and grabbing the Kumo ninja's fingers and breaking them with a quick snap of his wrist. It was one of the first lessons taught to shinobi and samurai alike. A ninja's weakness will always be his fingers. Without them, only the strongest of ninja could still perform ninjutsu, and if they could, then there was very little chance you managed to break their fingers in the first place. Without a way to release the pent-up energy, the lightning inside the shinobi's body became unstable, before unleashing itself in an explosion of light and gore. The lone warrior hadn't paused to watch his handiwork, however, and instead had moved towards the next enemy Shunshin. Kawarami? Or is he just that fast? A ninja from Kumo as well. Like many others of his village, this shinobi favored a sword, but as he tried to bring it down on the bare-handed man, he slapped the sword on the flat of the blade with a powerful palm strike while twisting his body to the side, letting it bury itself deep into the earth. The ninja was clever and experienced enough to not hold on to his weapon and instead jumped back, trying to create some space between him and his enemy. However, in midair, the lone man's hand lashed out, grabbing the airborne ninja by the ankle, before swinging him around, whoosh, right into a great fireball of one of Konoha's ninjas. Having shielded himself from the deadly technique, the lone warrior jumped away, leaving the burnt-out husk of the Kumo shinobi behind, returning to his previous spot in front of the wooden house. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed at that, even as he let Enma transform into his staff form, his thoughts shooting through his brain like lightning, his gaze analyzing the odd spectacle in front of him. He's protecting something. Something inside that house means enough to him that he'll fight to the death in order to protect it. Hiruzen made to jump in, Enma at the ready as he was turning this new intel over and over in his head, thinking of the best way to exploit it, before his eyes widened in shock. A Konoha and a Kumo ninja were both flying through hand seals, but had not seen the other one do it. Hiruzen, however, recognized both sets of hand seals. He probably knew more about the jutsu than their casters did, and in his mind's eye he saw the disaster about to happen. No. Don't. Both shinobi looked up in surprise, but both had been veterans of war, and had trained their bodies to move independently of their minds. If you had to think about how you're supposed to kill someone, chances were, he had already killed you instead. So, even as their eyes widened as they saw the same danger that Hiruzen had seen, a look of horror and fear crossing their features, their hands still completed their techniques unabated, both landing on their final seals simultaneously, calling out their technique as much because of automatism as well as a hopeless warning. Futon Tachikes, Katan Anetsu Jikogu. No, a blade of wind, screaming through the air with an almost visible sharpness, tearing up the ground behind it with deep furrows made with the ease of a hot kunai slicing through melted butter, met the pillar of flame that shot out of the ground where mere moments before the lone warrior had stood, shooting up into the sky with such heat that the rain in a diameter of a mile simply evaporated. And then things got worse. Hiruzen had to shield his eyes from the intense heat, only vaguely seeing the blurry shapes of the Konoha and Kumo ninja jump away, while the unknown enemy had already made himself scarce when the ground below him erupted into flame, flipping through hand seals as fast as he could, a terrified expression on his face. And then Hiruzen didn't see anything anymore, as the world was consumed by fire and light, an explosion shaking the ground, while the sky itself was set aflame. The 40-year-old Hokage could feel heat slam into him with an almost physical weight to it, scorching off his eyebrows and beard, while the metal plates in his helmet and armor started heating up to uncomfortable degrees. Hiruzen tried to work himself to his feet as fast as possible. There were Kumo shinobi nearby, after all only vaguely noticing that he had been flattened against the ground from the sheer intensity of the blast. He was too busy trying to pull off his armor without burning his fingers. As he looked back at the small village the fight had taken place in, a heavy sadness rested on his shoulders. Most of the buildings simply weren't there anymore, only blackened and burned skeletons of framework remaining. Another village. Gone. Another victim of this damned war. The Hokage morosely thought to himself, the destruction of his allies' hearth and home heavy on his conscience. Wrapping Enma, who was still in his staff form and glowing in ominous red, in the few scraps of fabric not torn up by battle, or burned by the disastrous misfire of the two techniques, Hiruzen glanced back at the village, his gray eyes trying to pierce the thick smoke and ash that obscured everything in sight. Guess we'll never know who that ninja was, or what he thought was worth protecting so much that he fought two groups of enemy shinobi on his own. He thought to himself, before his eyes widened in shock. A gust of wind blew away the lingering smoke, revealing the unknown enemy standing in front of the wooden house, red as a lobster, and looking like he could drop dead any second, while behind him, steam wafting in great clouds from the woodwork, stood the house, relatively whole compared to the rest of the burned-down village. Before he even knew what he was doing, Hiruzen had shunshined to the ninja's side with pinpoint precision, just in time to catch the unknown enemy as he sunk to his knees with a strangled gasp. As soon as the legendary Sarutobi laid his hands on the other ninja's reddened skin, he almost recoiled with a hiss. The man's skin was hot to the touch, and instead of looking burned, as Hiruzen had expected, he instead seemed to be cooked alive. A quick glance at the man's hands, one on the wall of his home, the other on his own chest, as well as the lingering chakra trails that hung around them, told Hiruzen just what had happened. He used a modified water prison jutsu on the home, while using a similar one on himself. It's why he is hurt the way he is. He wasn't burned by the fire, but the water around him flash-boiled at the sudden heat, cooking him inside. However, it was probably the best option out of a slew of disastrous ones. But still, to create a water prison large enough to cover an entire house, with just one hand, while making another in the other hand? Who is this man? As close as he was, Hiruzen could finally make out more details about the mystery ninja. He was young, somewhere in his early 20s, meaning Hiruzen was almost twice as old as him. His features were strong, with deep-set eyes and a square jaw. Hiruzen had never seen him before in his life. However, before Hiruzen could demand an answer to his question of the badly hurt ninja's identity, his earlier question was suddenly answered, as a soft wailing was heard from within the house. It was the sound of a baby, crying out to its parents. Guess I now know what he was trying to protect. Hiruzen wondered, staring at the half-dead ninja in his arms. As the wailing picked up in both pitch and volume, it seemed to reach the nearly unconscious shinobi, whose eyes snapped open at the sound. I am. Despite his grievous injuries, the apparent father made to jump to his feet and race towards his child. While a credit to his parenthood, trying to stress himself right now would very likely kill him, so before Hiruzen could stop himself, he laid a firm hand on the ninja's chest, pushing him back down. Immediately, the unknown shinobi's eyes snapped to his perceived assailant, his hands balling into fists with the sickening sound of skin being torn open, reacting much like any ninja would to restraining contact when weakened. Cutting off the fight before it could even begin, Hiruzen spoke up, his voice soft and soothing as he tried to hold the frightened father down. Be at ease. I am not your enemy. I am Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage of Konoha. I came here to free your village from Kumo's clutches, but I am afraid that it was destroyed when two ninjutsu combined with disastrous results. You were caught in the explosion, though you have managed to save your life. You are very gravely injured. Please remain here. I will retrieve Ayam and bring her to safety. Hiruzen knew that the ninja wouldn't accept the offer, even before he made it, but he had to get this mysterious man talking and quick. They did not have the luxury of time. Kumo could be on its way with reinforcements, the child could be gravely hurt inside of the house, and the man in his arms could very well have mere hours yet to live. Why should I trust you? The unknown warrior said, his tone wary but not hostile, and so steady that if it weren't for the fact that he was clearly cooked alive, Hiruzen would have thought he was in perfectly good health. Like I said, I am Hiruzen Sarutobi, Hokage of Konoha. The land of flowers is a vassal of the land of fire, and as such, your village was as well. You are under my protection, on my blood and honor, I swear it. I am your ally here. Let me get your daughter, before any harm befalls her, Hiruzen said, his last words accentuated by a piercing shriek of fear and distress coming from within the house. That convinced the unknown man probably even more than Hiruzen's words, because his eyes flickered to the house, and then to his own injured body, which was clearly not up to the task of doing much more than just lie there, waiting for death to come and claim its ruined form. A jerky nod, accompanied by the sound of even more skin tearing, before the bare-handed warrior focused on Hiruzen with an uncomfortable intensity. Bring her to me. Please. I need to see her. Be before it's. He said haltingly, fear of dying clear in his face, but more for the sake of his daughter than his own. Hiruzen nodded before he quickly patted down his pockets, searching for something to put underneath the man's head, in order to ease his suffering, which was clearly visible to his experienced eyes, no matter how well the man tried to hide it. Here, Hiruzen looked up in surprise at a yellow vest pushed in his face, held by a large calloused hand. Enma, smoke rolling off of him and with his fur burnt in some places, sans his vest, looked away in embarrassment. Use this. Hiruzen smiled at his old friend, even as he folded the garment, which smelled strongly of smoke, and laid it under the injured man's head, providing a little comfort, no matter how small. Thank you, Enma. Yeah, go get the sprog, will ya? The Monkey King said, sounding faintly embarrassed. Giving one more smile, Hiruzen dashed into the house at his greatest speed, leaving a gust of wind in his wake as he sprinted from room to room, worry for the child occupying his mind. He had been a Hokage during 2 world wars now, and had done or condoned some pretty stomach-churning stuff that still occasionally kept him up at night, but he refused to let innocence die under his watch. In his heart, something that Hashirama himself had seen and treasured, Hiruzen Sarutobi was, and always would be, a big old softy. Finally he found the nursery, made immediately clear by the bright, but soothing, walls, the toys littering every inch of the floor, and the clearly handmade crib in the corner. Well, that, and the wailing suddenly became a lot louder. Peering over the edge of the crib, Hiruzen smiled at the wailing little baby, chuckling as she started yelling even louder when she spotted his soot-covered face. Easy there, young one. I mean you no harm. Let's go and get you to your father, shall we? Gently picking her up, taking care to not get any of the soot or dirt that covered him on her pristine yellow baby clothes, Hiruzen settled the child in the crook of his arm, before making his way back outside. As he stepped out of the home, child in hand, Hiruzen saw that what had survived of his Konoha strike force had grouped around the house, while Enma was seated next to the badly burned father, giving him sips to drink from a water flask someone had unsealed. In the distance, Hiruzen could see the shapes of the Kumo force retreating back to the safety of their own borders, feeling a dark sense of vindication when he noticed that their number of survivors was significantly lower than their own. They weren't called the Land of Fire for nothing, after all. While Suna had a higher affinity for wind, Kumo for lightning, Iwa for stone and Kiri for water, Konoha had a large affinity for fire. As such, most of his forces had managed to deal slightly better with the sudden firestorm than the Kumo shinobi had done. Then again, as was once more demonstrated today, slightly in the ninja world could very well mean the difference between life and death. As Hiruzen bent down so father and daughter could be reunited, he didn't miss the looks of comprehension that dawned on his forces' faces as they saw the reason their enemy had fought as passionately as he had. A warm feeling of pride swelled inside his chest when he even saw a couple of looks of sympathy for the man, even though he had slain some of their numbers during their fight. And the mother? Hiruzen asked gently as he handed Ayam back to her father, though he expected the answer already. There was a brief pang of sorrow, before his face smoothed out, giving a shake of his head as he closed his eyes in pain, both emotional and physical. No, mother. Ah. I see. Hiruzen straightened himself, trying to hide a smile at the reunited family, but ultimately failed to do so when little Ayam's eyes lit up at the sight of Enma, her little hands waving about while a toothless smile appeared on her face. Kitty. Yeah, no, that was a losing battle from the start, sir. What do we do now? One of his shinobi asked, bringing him out of his thoughts and wiping the smile from his face. Hiruzen's expression hardened as he stared in the direction where the Kumo shinobi had fled to, his hands balling into fists. There's no way that I didn't hear or see that explosion. He'll be here within minutes at most. We need to move. While we denied Kumo a foothold within the lands of flowers, the destruction of this village is still a victory for them, another sin on their long list of crimes during this war. Take that to heart, men. Look around you, at the destruction of our people at the hands of our enemies, and use it fuel your will of fire to even greater heights. A short, subdued cheer went up at his little speech, though it left a bad taste in Hiruzen's mouth. While slandering wasn't something that he enjoyed doing, this was war, and to show your enemy in the worst light possible was simply par for the course. And the unknown, sir? At the question, Hiruzen looked back at the unnamed ninja, who was cradling his daughter to his chest, his eyes closed in exhaustion. Looking at the man's daughter, who was playing with a little patch of golden fur on the back of Enna's hand, Hiruzen realized he had already made his decision. He comes back with us. Call ahead, inform base that we are en route, multiple injured, one severe. Have them ready for us. I want this man's live saved, understood? Hi, Hokage-sama. Everyone move out. Without saying a word, Enma gathered the now unconscious ninja in his arm, while Ayam was placed on his broad shoulders, where she grabbed two tiny fistfuls of yellow golden hair on the Monkey King's head. As he walked past Hiruzen, the Great Ape glanced at his summoner from the corner of his eye, his face set in stone. Not a word, Hiruzen, not a word. With a badly hidden grin, Hiruzen placed his hands behind his back as he fell in step with his old friend. I wouldn't dream about it. Oh, great Yuba King-san, why you little? Hiruzen pulled away the heavy flap to the field hospital, his eyes zeroing in on its only patient, who was sitting up awake in his bed, while on the bed next to him, his little daughter was playing with a large stuffed monkey. Hiruzen didn't know who amongst his troops had gifted the young child with the toy Ayam, carried in as she was on Enna's shoulders, had been an immediate hit amongst his forces, all of them cooing over the little girl whenever they had the chance, but if he would ever find out, then he would buy them the finest bottle of sake he could find. Enna's face when he had seen the little girl gnaw toothlessly on the plush monkey's head had been truly priceless. His good mood evaporated, however, when he looked at the father of Ayam. Nobody knew his name, and with the destruction of his village, there were no records for them to check. Luckily, most of the population had already been evacuated beforehand, leaving only those who couldn't travel fast enough behind, such as a single father with a 1-year-old child. However, the surviving population of the unnamed village had already been moved further inward, away from the ever-shifting front lines, which meant that they couldn't even ask them for information. The man himself had been no help in that regard, being unconscious most of the time he had been in their care. Considering some of the surgeries that he had been forced to go through, Hiruzen rather saw that as a blessing in disguise. Skin transplants in field hospitals were very messy things. It's good to see you awake. How do you feel? It was clear that the enemy ninja was still a little out of it, as he appeared startled by Hiruzen's sudden voice. He looked away from where his daughter was still playing with her toy, oblivious to the world, and stared at the Hokage with a stony expression, keeping his eyes closed to slits. As well as can be, for someone who thought he was going to die, I suppose? He said after a short pause, his tone bland, but thankfully not hostile. Hiruzen moved closer to the bedridden ninja, smiling briefly when he saw Ayam look up at his approach, before she decided that her plushy monkey was more interesting, and resumed her gnawing attack. You have a name? He asked casually, though his tone held steel. The ninja in the bed stiffened, before forcing himself to relax. He stared defiantly at the third Hokage in silence, though he couldn't stop the worried flicker of his eyes towards his playing daughter. Come on, you must have a name, right? I need to call you something, don't I? Or should I just call you Tuchi, Hiruzen rumbled with amusement, though his expression was flat and his eyes cold. The young man looked back at him, before taking a deep breath and lifting his chin. Tuchi will do. Hiruzen raised a surprised eyebrow at the young man's defiance, before chuckling. Tell me, Tuchi, you aren't from the land of flowers, are you? It wasn't a question, and they both knew it. Tuchi's hands balled into fists, but otherwise he didn't move or talk. Taking that as confirmation, Hiruzen nodded to himself, before looking at the young man with a calculating gaze, clearly making Tuchi uncomfortable. Quite frankly, Tuchi, I don't care which village you came from. I don't even really care why you had to leave in the first place. But this is war, and Konoha needs soldiers. You stay with me, and I will protect you. I will allow both you and your daughter to live within Konoha's walls, and in return, you fight for me. Not on the front lines, and not in the open. We don't need to run the risk of somebody recognizing you after all. But you will fight for me. Tuchi looked at him with suspicion, as if he couldn't believe what Hiruzen was saying. You will allow me, a foreign nin, entrance to your hidden village? Just like that? And whenever I am on missions, I'm just supposed to leave my daughter behind in the midst of my enemy, like the perfect hostage? Why should I trust such an offer? Why should I trust you? The young man hissed, taking care not to upset his daughter, who was still oblivious to the tense discussion going on next to her. You are asking the wrong questions, son. You shouldn't ask if you can trust me. You should ask, why am I trusting you? Hiruzen said back calmly, looking completely unbothered by the suspicious and therefore volatile ninja in front of him. Taken aback, Tucci blinked in surprise, before he frowned in confusion. Okay. Why would you trust me? You don't know me, don't know where I come from, or what I've done. Hiruzen smiled, before seating himself on the chair next to Tucci's bed, making the younger ninja shuffle a little closer to the other edge of the bed in clear discomfort. For all of his bravado, Sarutobi Hiruzen was still a god in an age of legends. There was a fine line between bravery and stupidity, and Tucci knew very well where that line was. Like I said, those water jutsu gave me a pretty good idea of where you came from. As for what you did, at this, Hiruzen trailed off, his eyes glancing over at little Ayam, who was obviously getting tired, yawning wildly and snuggling close to the thoroughly drenched plushie. Let's just say that I won't be surprised when little Ayam here turns out to be special. Immediately Tucci shot up with alertness, fixing Hiruzen with an intensity that surprised the older ninja. No. Never. Whatever sort of deal we end up making, she stays out of our world. She will be a civilian. Understood? The young ninja said, his knuckles creaking with the strength he gripped his sheets with. Hiruzen simply smiled as he leaned back into the uncomfortable chair. So you do wish to make a deal? Very well. You fight for me, Black Ops only. In return, you will be allowed to set up a civilian identity within Konoha, with all the rights and freedom that entails. Your daughter will not be approached by me or mine, and allowed to live out the rest of her days as a civilian. With that, Hiruzen sprang to his feet, and moved to the exit of the field hospital, leaving a gaping and confused Tucci behind. Once you're healthy enough, pack your stuff. You and Ayam will be traveling to Konoha as soon as possible. Wait. Hiruzen paused at the exit, one hand resting on the heavy entrance flap. With a raised eyebrow, Hiruzen turned to look over his shoulder, glancing back at an uncomfortable-looking Tucci. Yes? You never answered my question. Why do you trust me? Hokage-sama. Hiruzen smiled at the hastily added honorific, before answering in a warm tone. Because within you, I can see the will of fire, burning brighter than any I have seen in a long time. Goodbye, Tucci, goodbye. Hokage-sama. So, how has Konoha been treating you? Hiruzen called, as he bounced little Ayam on his knee, the happy 2-year-old giggling with every bounce, her little hands waving around in the air in joy. Though Hiruzen had the sinking suspicion that the little girl was much more attached to Enma than to him. How should I counteract my opponent's influence upon this child? Hiruzen thought amusedly to himself, only half serious. Okay, maybe a little more than half. Oh, it has been fine, Hokage-sama. Came Tucci's harried voice from the kitchen, where he was making dinner for the three of them, the Hokage having decided on a whim to check on his village's latest addition to its forces. I sense a but, Tucci. Hiruzen replied patiently, before making silly faces at the toddler in his laps, causing Ayam to burst out into gales of laughter. The young man came out of the small kitchen wearing a dirty apron and wiping the sweat from his forehead with an equally dirty towel. But the neighbors are starting to ask questions, Hokage-sama. They know I pay my rent, they just can't figure out how. The ANBU in training replied. Hiruzen's lips thinned in thought, even as he rose and started putting Ayam in her kid's chair, Tucci having called that dinner was ready just moments before. It seems as if there's no choice, you'll need to get a civilian, day-to-day job. It was not that uncommon actually. Many of the higher-ranked ANBU operatives were working full-time for Hiruzen's Black Ops, and it was incredibly difficult to keep up a regular shinobi lifestyle alongside a secret Black Ops career. Add to that the fact that there were plenty of shinobi that had signature techniques, and thus were easily recognized, such as Hitaki Kakashi, who everybody would know had been in ANBU, and sometimes it was simply not viable to have a ninja be both a rank-and-file shinobi and an ANBU operative. To circumvent this, occasionally, a shinobi would die during a mission and his death made public. Then, the ninja would join ANBU and enjoy perfect anonymity, even when using famous techniques, since those could have been passed down to him or her. Should such an operative find a need to move openly within Konoha or another hidden village, then they underwent plastic surgery and received chakra suppression seals, and took on the identity of a mere civilian. At any given time, there were around 24 such civilians within Konoha, with around the same number spread amongst the other ninja nations, most of them acting as contacts to his student's spy network, which also allowed him to check and update their seals at the same time, which was why he was forced to visit each contact in person, a time-consuming process. A similar method was used for ninja who Konoha couldn't exactly be allowed to see employ. Usually this involved missing nin from other countries, but it could also simply be a VIP that shouldn't be in Konoha in the first place. If the missing nin or VIP was too well known, then they received the same treatment as the ANBU operatives who went civilian did, so they could move freely within Konoha. If they weren't, like Tuchi, then they were simply installed as civilian newcomers, while joining ANBU instead of the regular shinobi force. However, while Tuchi had successfully been integrated as a civilian, he didn't have a day job yet, having been too busy with familiarizing himself in Konoha's Special Forces operations. And while their home wasn't particularly luxurious, it did raise some eyebrows. My thoughts exactly, Hokage-sama. But I don't know how to pull something like that off. Kabaraicho has been working me into the ground, and trying to fast-track me up the ranks. Tuchi replied, as he set the table, and brought out the food. Have you ever heard of the Kage Bunshin, Tuchi? Hiruzen asked good-naturedly, before he glanced at what the younger ninja had placed in front of him. Ramen? He asked with amusement lining his voice, looking back at the ANBU trainee with a raised eyebrow. Tuchi blushed, before shrugging his shoulders. I didn't know you were coming for dinner, Hokage-sama, and this was all that I had left in the fridge. At least Ayam seems to like it, the young father said, looking over at his daughter with a fond smile. Following Tuchi's gaze, Hiruzen found himself bursting out into laughter, as little Ayam looked up from where she had been dunking her face into her bowl of ramen, several strands of noodles hanging from her mouth, nose and even her eyebrows. Still chuckling, Hiruzen took a fair more sedate sip, before he opened his eyes in shock. Tuchi, yes Hokage-sama? This is really good. You should do something with this. Oh, I don't know Hokage-sama. Are you sure? Of course I am. It's gonna be great. You know, you didn't actually have to keep the name Tuchi when you registered yourself here in Konoha, right? Hiruzen asked as he sat at the empty bar of Ramen Ichiraku's. The shop finally closed after a long day of unruly customers. 8-year-old Ayam was already sent to bed, and it was only Hiruzen and Tuchi that had remained, the two friends sharing a little nightcap. Tuchi chuckled, wrinkling the lines that started to form around his eyes, and downed his sake in a great gulp. Yeah, I did. But Tuchi, I know why you gave me that name, Hokage-sama, but it's appropriate in more ways than one. Oh? Hiruzen asked in surprise, sipping from his own sake. There used to be a saying, in my family always protect what's precious to you, with your own 2 hands. After Ayam was born, I decided to finally honor that saying, and left behind all of my shinobi tools. Never used anything else than my bare hands since that day, even when that horrible fight between you and Kumo happened. So, Tuchi, because I use my hands to protect what's precious to me. Tuchi said heavily, lifting his calloused hands and studying them intently. Do you know what happened to your family? Scattered, most likely. I was only one of the few ninja that our family had. The rest of us were strong, yes, but no shinobi material. My guess is that they left my hometown, in search of greener pastures. Tuchi answered, glaring at the sake in front of him for making him commit that slip-up, before downing it in one gulp as revenge. You use shinobi weapons now, Hiruzen said softly, graciously changing the subject as he downed the last of his sake. Tuchi snorted in response, before filling Hiruzen's cup again. As Tuchi, I still keep to my family's saying, and use my own 2 hands for everything, from building this place up, to defending the most precious thing in my life. I'll probably get plenty of opportunities to show you that, Hokage-sama, when Ayam gets older and the boys start chasing her. The ramen chef chuckled, before his expression became somber again. But as salamander, I use everything I can, with every ounce of strength that I have. Because that's important as well. An ANBU captain should be well-rounded, and not limit himself in any way, because he has a responsibility to more than just himself, or his own beliefs. The single father said with a decisive nod, missing Hiruzen's smile as he hid it behind his sake cup. And that goes double for commanders, I suppose. Tuchi's eyes went wide as he choked on his sake, before he rounded on Hiruzen, shaking his head as he opened his mouth, but the Hokage cut him off. Commander Kaba is retiring, Tuchi. He has chosen you as his successor, and I agree with his assessment. Congratulations, Commander Salamander. I don't know what to say. Thank you, Hokage-sama, Tuchi said haltingly, before giving a deep bow. It was made somewhat less impressive when he stumbled a little when he did so. Hiruzen snorted in amusement, before shaking his head. Stand up, Tuchi. I can see the alcohol rushing to your head. There's no need to bow or scrape, you earned this, so well done. All I ask is a small favor in return. Say it, Hokage-sama, and it will be done. Tuchi said in a serious tone as he straightened himself, clearly unaware that the effect was ruined by the fact that his face was as red as a tomato. Uzumaki Naruto. I foresee great troubles in his life, and I think that a safe haven. Say no more, Hokage-sama. No matter how much the village may turn on young Naruto, you have my word that he will always be welcome here. And at a discount too. That's all I ask, old friend. That's all I ask? Chapter 9 Dancing with the Devil in the Pale Moonlight. Sarutobi Hiruzen, 3rd Hokage, the professor, god of shinobi, yada yada yada, sat down on the only chair in the living room of his former advisor, Shimura Danzo, with a bone-rattling sigh, wiping a wrinkled hand over his tired face. The sound of a quill scratching on paper made him look up at said advisor, who was sitting across from him at a low table, dutifully filling out absolutely massive piles of paperwork. The man's expression was unnaturally serene, and his movements almost robotic. It appeared as if the traitor wasn't even aware of the Hokage's presence at all. There was no signs of the wounds that Danzo received during the desperate battle from almost a week ago, but this was done intentionally by Hiruzen. The cover story was that old age would eventually claim the traitorous advisor, but visible wounds from a fight would immediately blow that plan out of the water. Of course, they were already on thin ice as it was. The fight between Danzo and Uchiha Shursue's ANBU protection squad had not gone unnoticed. While Hiruzen had managed to deflect the more overt inquiries, claiming everything from training exercises to apprehending enemy infiltrators, there was still an air of suspicion amongst the higher-ranked shinobi in his forces. The Uchiha began to grow restless. Fu, take these documents and secure them in my personal vaults. Use combination 11B/C and make sure to check the security seals when you leave. Hi, Danzo-sama. Bowing at the waist, Shursuke gently took the papers out of Danzo's hand, pausing only long enough to stare into the root leader's eye with his own spinning red ones, before silently moving away. The young ANBU stumbled for a moment, squeezing his eyes shut and pinching the bridge of his nose as a thin tear of blood rolled down his face. Here, face made of stone, Hiruzen extended a white towel to the Uchiha, would look surprised, but grateful at the gesture. The Hokage waited for a moment, allowing his ninja to clear his face and center himself once more, before gently asking his questions. How is it going? Silently, Shursuke handed Hiruzen the file Danzo had given him moments before. The illusion still holds strong, Hokage-sama. He thinks that I am one of his most trusted operatives, and that he has decided to document all of his actions since he has founded Root. Other than that, his world is entirely blank. You are sure of this? I'm not gonna lie, Hokage-sama. Shursuke said with an exhausted sigh as he moved towards the kitchen, where he thankfully poured himself a glass of cool water. Hiruzen raised an eyebrow at the Uchiha's informal tone, but decided to let it slide in this instance. From what he knew of Konoha Matsukami, it was only meant to be used around once or twice a month. Shursuke had been using it multiple times a day for the past week. Quite frankly, it was a miracle the young ANBU was functioning at all. His mind is strong, Hokage-sama. I have never encountered such mental willpower before. And that's without the traps his own Yamanaka have installed in his mind. Hiruzen frowned, his hands clenching into fists at the reminder of his ex-friend's craftiness. When Hiruzen had ordered one of his loyal Yamanaka to delve into Danzo's mind in order to extract any information that the traitorous advisor had kept to himself all this time, he had nearly lost his ANBU operative altogether, a pre-made defense trapping the Yamanaka in Danzo's mindscape. It had taken 3 other Yamanaka a full day to retrieve their clan member, and he came out wrong. Hiruzen had been forced to order a complete mind wipe, and dismissed the Nin from ANBU on the grounds of excessive mental trauma. But we have disabled those traps, Operative Uchiha. You yourself have made Danzo admit to that. Shursuke gave a nod, before finishing off his glass in a single gulp. He immediately turned back to the sink in order to refill it. Speaking over his shoulder, the young Uchiha continued, True. But apparently he has several routines in his daily schedule, specifically designed to warn himself if he is ever mind-controlled should he ever deviate from those routines. There are also several notes and journals that serve the same purpose. He even has trigger words installed in his mind. Trigger words? They initiate a complete reboot of his mind, essentially clearing most mental compulsions. I only found out last night, when I suddenly woke up to him standing over my bed with a raised kunai. Hiruzen only barely managed to hide his wince at that. He began to suspect that the bags underneath Shursuke's eyes were for other reasons than overusing his technique. What happened? As you instructed, I started giving him orders to make a written report of all of his covert operations he has undertaken since his time with Root, all the while making it seem as if it was his idea in the first place. Apparently, he had a specifically designed trigger phrase, which was almost literally the order I tried to give him. He managed to free himself from my jutsu at least partially, but before he managed to strike, I used Konoha Matsukami on him again, making him decide that he suddenly wanted to get a nap. Finishing his third glass, Shursuke gave a weak chuckle, before moving over to the Spartan chairs in the dining room, letting his head fall on the table with a dull thud. Since then we have also started pumping him full of drugs, since the reboot only clears mental afflictions. So, now I am Yamanaka Fu, trusted operative of Shimura Danzo. And he doesn't have a clue, the young ninja said with a hint of bitterness. Hiruzen joined his ANBU operative at the table, allowing Shursui a moment of peace, before continuing with his questioning. It was harsh, but they had little time, and they needed to pump Danzo for all that he was worth, before the next complication exploded in their faces. Are the trigger words dealt with then? Not lifting his head from the table, Shursui nodded, before glancing at his Hokage from the corner of his eye, an exhausted look clearly visible in the dull onyx of his pupils. Hi, Hokage-sama. To keep this as contained as possible, I ordered the same Yamanaka who removed the mental traps to identify and remove the trigger words and phrases, then had them wipe each other's mind from everything that has happened here. Hiruzen frowned at that, stroking his pointy beard in thought at the young Uchiha's actions. ANBU ranks were kept vague and fluid on purpose. Not only did this make it more difficult for infiltrators to join their forces, or for spies to identify the civilian identities of his operatives, it also allowed him to form highly specialized teams on the fly, regardless of whatever rank the individual ninja held within ANBU itself. Still, while Shursui was the unofficial leader of this operation due to his eyes being imperative to its success, to order the mind wipe of not one, but 3 senior operatives was unusual to say the least. Then again, these are highly unusual circumstances as well. Hiruzen thought to himself, studying the young Uchiha with a critical gaze, his expression softening somewhat when he saw that Shursui was on the verge of falling asleep where he sat, nearly dead on his feet, but still sharp enough to take charge of the operation, and not hesitating in doing what's necessary to keep it contained as well, even if this means ordering around his superiors. Fine qualities for an ANBU. For a commander, in fact. While Salamander was a formidable ninja in his own right, the fact remained that losing an arm drastically reduced a shinobi's combat capabilities, no matter his specialization or experience. Danzo himself was a perfect example for this. Still, finding a replacement for Salamander was still a while off, thankfully, Hiruzen having bought them all a little time by doing something that still turned his stomach whenever he thought about it. In order to keep spies on the wrong foot, and there were spies in Konoha, there was no doubt about that he had ordered a few ANBU to remove their own arm, as well as ordering several accidents amongst the civilian population. This way, even if a spy managed to uncover that ANBU Commander Salamander had lost an arm, they would be unable to figure out his civilian identity by searching for people that had suddenly and mysteriously lost an appendage. This should buy them enough time to search for a replacement Salamander, the title being passed on to whoever held the position. While the ANBU commander was supposed to head Konoha's Black Ops operations, and as such should be unknown to the other villages, this was simply not the case, either due to the intelligence provided by spies, or by sightings on the battlefield during wartime, the commander's sheer strength sometimes necessary in order to turn the tide of battle, which meant that Hiruzen had to get a ninja out there with the Salamander mask on, or the other villages would immediately see his absence as a sign of weakness in Konoha's strength. Thankfully for Shursui, there was still a little time before a new commander would step onto the world stage, and as it was, it would probably be one of Salamander's current lieutenants, due to their greater skill and experience. That didn't mean that Shursui couldn't be trained for the position, however. Shaking the thoughts of promotions and the cloak and dagger power plays that were always going on between Hiruzen and his fellow Kage, the aged Sarutobi gently shook the young Shursui by the shoulder, causing the ANBU operative to literally jump out of his chair, one hand raised to his temple. Yukisu Uchiha, reporting for duty, sir. At ease, operative. Hiruzen said calmly, just barely able to mask his amusement. Thank you, sir. And with that, Shursui collapsed back into his chair, his head sinking back towards the table. Hiruzen quickly cut that off, by coughing into his fist, before continuing with his questions. So, all trigger words are removed, all mental traps dismantled, and I assume that you have questioned Danzo on his routines and journals? Seeing Shursui's tired nod, Hiruzen held up the stack of files the young Uchiha had given him under the guise of Yamanaka-fu. And this documentation? It is accurate? Shursui barely managed to stifle a yawn, before nodding again. Hi, Hokage-sama. One of the first things that we managed to get out of him are various safe houses for his root operatives hidden throughout the elemental nations, as well as shutdown commands for his forces. We have managed to capture several of them here in Konoha, and they are refitted for our own use as we speak. True ninja rhetoric that waste not, want not. Only taken a little bit more literal, in this case. Hiruzen thought to himself in wry amusement. And the operatives themselves? Broken. Completely and utterly. But alive at least. All of them with a seal that makes it impossible for them to talk about Danzo or his operations, but we are starting to get bits and pieces from his notes about how to circumvent this. Hiruzen lifted a graying eyebrow at that. Bits and pieces? Hi. In order to keep the illusion as secure and subtle as possible, it's essential that Danzo keeps thinking that he is responsible for his actions. It also means that the pressure I can put on him is limited. If what I order him to do is too different from what he would usually do, then he might break free completely. I thought that your Kodo Amatsukami circumvented this entirely. That's what makes it such a formidable genjutsu, is it not? Normally, Yes. With him? Apologies, Hokage-sama, but after the scare he gave me last night, I'd really rather not risk it, drugged or not. Fair enough. Hiruzen allowed, somehow not surprised that his former rival managed to thwart him even when he was essentially being mentally enslaved to him. For a moment, there fell a silence in Danzo's kitchen, Hiruzen staring out the window at the sunlit houses of Konoha, the only sounds that of a quill softly scribbling on paper in the living room and several birds happily singing in the trees that lined his former advisor's backyard, as an old lady shambled past, a bag of groceries in hand, being assisted by a ninja who was probably her son, if her questioning about when he was finally going to grow up and find a nice young lady to settle down with, so that I can have a few grandkids before I die, huh? Was anything to go by. Outside on the street, a young hate gecko hurriedly coughed in his hand, an impressive blush lighting up his face. Hokage-sama? Turning to the young Uchiha next to him, Hiruzen was surprised at how nervous Shisui looked, his utter exhaustion completely forgotten. Making sure that his expression was gentle and inviting, the Hokage inclined his head, prompting his operative to speak his mind. Yes, Operative Shisui? Briefly, Shisui squirmed in his seat, before blurting out his question. Hokage-sama, during your fight with Danzo, you said that you had checked all of the graves. What did you mean by that? Hiruzen sagged in his seat, resting his hand on his fist as he stared at the young Anbu in front of him, wondering how he should deal with this situation. I just can't catch a break, huh? Damn it all, Minato. It should be you sitting here. I'm getting too old for this shit. No, I already am too old for this shit. Hiruzen thought to himself, before sighing deeply. You are briefed on the QB reports about the identity of the mysterious ninja that released and controlled him during the attack 9 years ago? Hi, Hokage-sama. The figure claimed that he was Uchiha Madara, and while we do have records of Madara controlling the QB in the past, the demon identified the masked ninja as an imposter. Indeed. Following that revelation, I ordered Salamander to look into all records of Uchiha that have our MIA or Kia, as well as checking your graves. Seeing Shisui's affronted expression at the revelation, Hiruzen quickly continued, too tired to get into a confrontation with one of the few Uchiha still loyal to his village. We had to be sure, Shisui. Grave robbing, as distasteful as it is a possibility we must keep in mind. After all, the Uchiha do not possess a seal as the Hyuga do, and we all know how desperate the other nations are for a Sharingan of their own. Somewhat mollified, Shisui settled down, though he still had his arms crossed, and glared at the Hokage suspiciously. Good. No ninja worth his salt should be so easily swayed, no matter what or by whom. Hiruzen thought grimly to himself, before he continued. As we checked the graves, we saw definite signs of tampering with the bodies. Some we believe to have been performed by Danzo, others appear the work of another party. My best guess is Orochimaru. His obsession with the Sharingan is well known, and he is depraved enough to stoop to something as disgusting as grave robbing. Hiruzen said in a harsh tone, though inside, his heart ached. Yes, Orochimaru had been a traitor to the Leaf for a number of years now, and yes, he had been a monster for many more, but he had been a trusted student and even a son to Hiruzen for far, far longer. To think about the horrible being the bright young man, whom Hiruzen had taught his very first henge, had turned into still cut deep into his heart. As it is, Danzo and Orochimaru have probably remained working together even after Root's dissolution, but we'll get confirmation about that out of Danzo sooner or later. However, when we checked the graves, we found that one was empty. Uchiha Madara. Shisui breathed, his mind still managing to catch on quickly, despite the fog of exhaustion heavily weighing on all of his thoughts. Hiruzen nodded, his face gaining a grave expression. When I say empty, I mean that in the most literal way it wasn't emptied, since there never was anything inside in the first place. We now believe that Madara didn't die at the Valley of the End in the fight with my sensei, but instead managed to escape. Shisui frowned in confusion, worrying his lip between his teeth. But the QB said that it wasn't Madara that released him? So doesn't that mean that Madara died there anyway? Whether or not Madara did indeed perish at the Valley of the End is of no consequence at this time. Old age would have claimed him by now. While there are ways of expanding your lifespan, from what I remember of him, Madara would be far too proud to actually use any of them. No, what we are looking at is a disciple of his, continuing his plans after his death in his name. In this case, literally, Shisui slumped in his seat, a defeated expression on his face as he mulled his Hokage's words over in his head. So the villagers are right then? An Uchiha released the QB and ordered the rampage from 9 years ago? Briefly Hiruzen hesitated in answering the young ninja, before stealing his heart. Shisui had more than earned his headband for several years now, the time for coddling was long past, no matter how much Hiruzen wished it wasn't. Not necessarily, as he could have simply gifted his eyes to his disciple, but it's very unlikely. Not only would Madara never give up his eyes, his brother's eyes, if the legends are to be believed, but the subjugation of the tailed beast is a highly advanced technique of the Sharingan, and if Hitaki Kakashi is anything to go on, non-Uchiha would be unable to perform it. The chakra cost of the technique, combined with the drain from keeping the dojutsu activated, would outright kill most ninja. Shursui buried his face in his hands, his body shaking at the revelation that one of his own family might have been responsible for all of the pain and suffering the Kyuubi had caused during his rampage, and the subsequent tensions between the Uchiha and the rest of the village. But can't we use this? Reveal this to the clan? I fear that at this point, they would view it more as an attack on their person, rather than an explanation. And do not forget, we came to this conclusion on the word of a demon and evidence gathered from desecrating their families' graves. No, I am afraid that only your unique jutsu could broker peace between the Uchiha and Konoha now. Hiruzen answered with a heavy voice, his tone subdued. And I can't use it on the clan, since I'm stuck using it on Danzo here, or he'll do even more damage. And we can't just kill Danzo, because he still has a ton of useful information, not to mention unknown failsafes for just such a scenario. Shursui laughed bitterly to himself, clenching his fists hard enough that Hiruzen could hear bone creak. A heavy silence fell across the dining room, and Hiruzen suddenly realized that the sun didn't seem as bright anymore, or the birds singing as joyful as he had before. He was shaken from his observations by a shaky sigh from Shursui, and when he looked back, he pretended not to notice the way the young ninja desperately wiped his sleeve across his eyes. So, assassination then? Hiruzen froze in his seat, before very slowly forcing himself to relax. A heavy weight seemed to settle across his shoulders, while guilt seemed to drag his heart out of his chest and into an unfathomable abyss. Yes, he whispered softly, looking at one of the few remaining loyal Uchiha with sorrow in his eyes. Shursui nodded, before desperately wiping his eyes once more. He tried to speak, but had to swallow a few times before he managed to actually form words, and even then his voice was still shaky. You. Ahem. You can't use your own ninja. The Hokage attacking one of Konoha's own clans would spark a civil war, and in turn a world war. You can't wait for the Uchiha to make the first move, for the same reasons. It needs to be an internal affair. It'll make Konoha look weaker, but it won't ignite a war at the very least. Shursui reasoned, his voice full of pain, even as he gave up on keeping the tears flowing down his face. Hiruzen felt his heart break for the youth in front of him, but forced himself to remain seated if Shursui were to truly follow in Salamander's footsteps in the future, or even to simply hold together the remains of the Uchiha clan after the execution. Then he would need to become a lot more hardened than he was now. It is a cruel thing to do. But then again, it is a cruel world we live in. Minato. Sensei. What would you have done? Slowly, Shursui managed to regain some of his composure, and continued with his reasoning. Hiruzen let him do so, allowing the young Uchiha to both settle his mind, as well out of a faint hope that in making Shursui go through the problem on his own, he might find a way that didn't require any bloodshed. He wasn't counting on it though, so, it should be an Uchiha who kills the members of the clan that wish to perform the coup. No easy task, so the Uchiha in question needs to be incredibly powerful, while at the same time still loyal to Konoha. I'm stuck in here, which means? You're planning on using Itachi, aren't you? Hiruzen simply nodded, not reacting when Shursui completely stilled in his seat, the only movement he made being the tears that steadily flowed down his face. I see. The youth choked out, before mechanically rising out of his seat and moving over towards the sink. As the young Uchiha rinsed his face, Hiruzen rose to his feet, catching Shursui by the shoulder when he made to return to Danzo in the living room. Operative Uchiha Shursui. Hiruzen began, his voice stern, but not harsh. However, when Shursui looked at him with eyes that were completely dead inside, he softened his tone. Shursui. Will you be able to handle what's to come? There was a brief pause before Shursui answered, his tone as dead as his eyes. Hi, Hokage-sama. Now, if you don't mind, I must return to my mission. If I don't apply Kodoha Mitsukami on Danzo regularly, he might escape. And with that, Shursui stiffly left for the leaving room, leaving an old man behind, whose back was bent under the mountain of guilt he carried in silence. Out of the way. Move. What the hell, Gaki? Hey, watch it. What's the big idea, huh? I'm late. And with that, Naruto Uzumaki, prankster extraordinaire, jailer to the fearsome Kyuubi no Yoko, and perpetually late person, took to the roof with a burst of chakra to his legs, leaving a gale of wind in his wake. Damn it all, to the very depths of hell, little one. Do you have to be so loud? Came a grumbling from the boy's mind, the fox stuck in the extra-dimensional prison tied to the ink on Naruto's stomach, clearly not appreciating being waken up in such a manner. I am late, I know. So stop screaming about it already. But this is the first day of the academy. If I am late now, then the teacher will hold that against me for the rest of my life. I just know it. Then stop screaming to me about it, and just run faster, damn you. Are you a ninja or not? Right. Thanks, Foxy-san. And my name is not Dash. But Naruto had already closed the link, and began channeling even more chakra to his legs, making leaps tens of feet long. Even in his haste to reach the academy on time, the blonde couldn't help but laugh at the top of his lungs, as he sailed over houses and streets alike. Being a ninja is so awesome. And with that thought, while still in midair, Naruto flew through several hand seals, before being enveloped in a large cloud of smoke. What came roaring out of the cloud had several civilians and one rather embarrassed ninja shriek in fright. Flapping an enormous set of leather wings, an honest-to-God dragon flew out of the smoke, ruffling the hair of the people below with the speed it was flying, its long sinuous body stretched as straight as an arrow behind the gigantic wings, propelling the Naruto dragon in a mad dash towards the Hokage Tower, proudly standing tall over the rest of Konoha. Unfortunately for Naruto and the academy, his training with flying forms were more centered around birds that could achieve great heights, rather than great speeds. In fact, this was the fastest that Naruto had ever gone. His chakra-fueled charges didn't really count, since those were more accidents than anything that Naruto had actually done, and he quickly discovered this when the academy suddenly became a lot closer than he had expected. As he tried to brake, and only succeeded in tumbling head over tail through the air, one final thought rang through Naruto's mind. I think this is actually going to make a worse expression than coming late to class. And then he crashed through the window, and the rest of the wall, mere moments before. Hello class, my name is Yumino Irika, but you may call me Irika-sensei. As your sensei from this point forwards until you graduate in 3 years' time, I wish you all the best, and look forward to working with you all. The young Chunin, a thick scar running over the bridge of his nose, smiled at the exited class of ninja hopefuls in front of him, stealthily keeping an eye on the clan children in the room. So many of them in a single year? And most of them the children of clan heads? That cannot be a coincidence. Best that I keep an eye on all of them. Let's start with the roll call, shall we? He said aloud, receiving a chorus of enthusiastic "Hi sensei." In return, except for the Nara, of course, who appeared to have fallen asleep already. He quickly went down the list, recognizing some names from his comrades in Konoha's ninja forces, and others from various shops that he frequented in the village. With those, he made sure to make small talk, politely informing whether or not they were related to the people that he knew, and building rapport with them as he did. With those that he didn't recognize, he invited them to reveal a little about themselves, and he made sure to react positively on whatever they said, no matter how inane, in order to gain a positive relation with them as well. Yumino Irika was a nice guy second, but a ninja first, after all. However, as he approached the end of the list, his eyes widened slightly, before setting into a carefully neutral mask. Uzumaki Naruto? He called out, pride that his voice was steady, and without any note of hostility, though the more perceptive children noticed that the warmth was gone from his voice as well. Hearing no answer, Irika tried a few times more, while a dark vindication made itself known in his gut. TCH. Leave it to the demon brat to come late to class. Honestly, what do you expect of Dash? No. That's not fair. I promised that I would teach with an open mind, and I will do so. Maybe he was held up. He is a person of interest to Konoha after all. Maybe he was called away for something? Irika was shaken from his internal dilemma by the shrill voice of Yamanaka Ino, only daughter to Yamanaka Inoichi, part of the current Ino Shikacho unit. Sensei. What's that? Looking up distractedly, Irika's eyes widened suddenly when he saw a large black shape hurl towards the academy at breakneck speeds. In fact, it even seemed as if it was heading to his classroom. Eyes wide, even as he grabbed a kunai from the pouch on his hip, Irika screamed at the children as he dove at them in order to protect them with his body. Everybody get down. He briefly saw several of the clan children having done just that already out of instinct, while most of the civilians were still staring at him in confusion. Crash! With the sound of glass and wood shattering apart, the black blur slammed into his classroom, ending up on the ground where mere moments his beautiful, brand spanking new, extremely expensive desk had stood. When the dust cleared, both Irika and his students stood with mouths agape as they stared at what appeared to be real-life dragon lying on the floor of the classroom, surrounded by splinters of wood and broken glass. The titanic being of myth gave a mighty groan, poof, before it was enveloped by a cloud of smoke. Hurriedly using some chakra, while holding his kunai out in front of him, Irika blew away the gray smoke, revealing, ouch, my head hurts. A small blonde boy, sitting up while rubbing his head, where an impressive bump was forming before the teacher's very eyes. Feeling the gaze of Irika and the rest of the class on him, the small child slowly turned towards them, before looking up at Irika's steadily reddening face. For a second, the young blonde looked like a deer caught in a cat-on jutsu, before he gave Irika a gigantic grin, stretching the whisker marks on his cheeks while closing his eyes. Hey there sensei, hee. Sorry about the wall, but you see, I was getting late. So, you. With wide eyes the child shrank back, while thunderclouds formed over Irika's head, his voice shaking the room they were standing in to its very foundations. Detention. There hung a short silence in the room as Irika's voice echoed throughout the entirety of Konoha, before it was broken by a low whistle from one of the children in the classroom, who were all peeking over the edge of their desks. Damn Naruto, that must be a record or something. Shut up, Kiba. Above the newly remodeled academy, Sarutobi Hiruzen looked down at the illustrious place of learning now with a brand new ventilation system before letting his head drop in his hands. Naruto. What am I going to do with you? The Hokage asked himself, not sure whether to cry or laugh and eventually settling on an odd mix of both. Uchiha Itachi, 15 years old, prodigy and ANBU captain, was a man boy really on a mission. Night had fallen over Konoha, and the moon was hidden behind the clouds. While Itachi's body was steady, his heart was hammering inside his chest. A few days ago, he had received the order from the Hokage that the orchestrators of the coup were to be eliminated, lest Konoha be plunged into another world war, which included Itachi's parents. Thankfully, tonight was only a recon mission. While he was powerful, he wasn't powerful to go up against the majority of the Uchiha clan alone and emerge victorious. Not that that really would stop Itachi if he managed to take out enough of his family before they managed to kill him. They might decide to still abandon the coup either way. Unfortunately, there was no way of knowing this, and could very easily backfire on Konoha if the clan was to decide that his snapping was the fault of Konoha's machinations. That, in a manner of speaking, they were right certainly didn't ease the young ninja's mind, which was why he was now patrolling the Uchiha compound, having volunteered for a couple of border patrol missions in order to do so without any suspicion. He was looking for every possible hole in the defense of his clan's compound, preferably large enough for the quick entrance and exit for an elite ANBU kill squad. Itachi was no fool. Despite being only 15 years old, he was already the veteran of one of the bloodiest wars his world had ever seen. He knew the horrors of war, and he knew just how precariously close they were to unleashing them upon the world once more. This needed to be fast, this needed to be quick, and most of all, it needed to be pinned on him. Itachi knew he was basically throwing away his life by continuing with this operation, but he wasn't as bothered by this as he had expected to be. After all, are not all ninja prepared to die for their village the moment they don their headband? The only difference was that his body would keep on serving Konoha long after he had died, because there was no doubt in his mind that Uchiha Itachi, son to Uchiha Fugaku and Uchiha Mikoto, wouldn't survive the night. What would emerge in his stead the day after, however, was anyone's guess. He jumped towards the nearest tree, hoping for a better vantage point, before suddenly twisting in midair, throwing a brace of shuriken and kunai, his Sharingan whirling madly as it came alive, nearly glowing in the darkness. The presence he had only now sensed managed to dodge the barrage of weapons, before several strands glinted in the faint moonlight, revealing themselves to be ninja wire, allowing Itachi to quickly redirect the shuriken in 6 different directions simultaneously with nothing more than a flick of his fingers. The rapidly changing shuriken forced the unknown figure to make a wild leap to the left, but suddenly Itachi was right there, still controlling the multitude of shuriken with his left hand, while his right hand whipped out the tanto strapped to his back. His eyes slowed everything to a crawl, the spinning tomo already throwing a multitude of high-level genjutsu in short succession at his opponent, even as he closed in with his short sword in a frontal assault, the gleaming tips shining brightly in the moonlight, while the shuriken and even some redirected kunai flew towards his enemy's unprotected back. Pinned as he was, Itachi fully expected the mysterious ninja to dodge to the side in an effort to flank him with taijutsu or maybe some hidden weapon, concealed underneath the large and shapeless black cloak his opponent was wearing. It was almost like an unspoken agreement between them that neither ninja considered ninjutsu. Both were here on a secretive mission, and drawing attention to themselves was the last thing either one needed right now. That didn't keep them from trying to stab each other to death to their heart's content, which is why Itachi was surprised when his opponent didn't dodge, or even took out a weapon of some kind instead. He simply allowed Itachi's tanto to pierce him in the gut. Itachi's eyes widened in surprise at the action, completely taken off guard by his opponent's apparent death wish. However, this allowed his enemy's arm to shoot out like lightning, and grasp Itachi's outstretched arm in a vice-like grip, the sound of bones grinding against one another audible in the stillness of the forest. With an agility that should be impossible with a sword sticking out of your gut, the unknown ninja twisted around, dragging Itachi along and throwing him at his own shuriken. Itachi managed to hold onto his tanto as his assailant released him, the sword sliding out of his body without any resistance at all, before he managed to turn on the spot and striking all of the thrown weapons out of the air with a single swing. Turning back to his opponent, Itachi glanced out of the corner of his eye at his tanto, and wasn't surprised to see that the blade was still clean, without even a hint of blood. A quick glance at his opponent showed that his cloak didn't have so much as a cut or tear, despite Itachi having seen with his own Sharingan that his sword had penetrated the other ninja's body for at least a couple of inches. "Who are you?" Itachi asked, his voice calm and his face completely impassive. Young as he was still a very experienced ninja, and this wasn't the first time that he went up against an opponent who was immune to attacks for some reason or other, though in the privacy of his mind, he admitted that something like this was new, even to him. The ninja stepped a little closer towards him, the moon coming out from beneath the dark clouds that had hidden him for so long, bathing the man's mask in a cold pale light. "My name is Uchiha Madara. And I have a proposition for you, Uchiha Itachi." "Oh, make 4, my name is..." "Hello? My name is Uchiha Madara. You killed my father. Prepare to die." What? Hi. My name is... What? My name is... Who? My name is... Uchiha Madara. Are you alright? My name is Uchiha Madara. Uchiha. I don't get it. My name is Uchiha Madara, commander of the armies of the North, general of the Felix Legions. Loyal servant to the true emperor, Marcus Aurelius. Father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance, in this life or the next. None of what you said was true. Or made any sense. The class is Pain 101. Your instructor is Uchiha Madara. I am seriously starting to question your capability to teach anything at all. I'm Uchiha Madara. I solve problems. Somehow, I rather doubt that. Uchiha Madara is my name, but some people call me the Street Fighter. No, they don't. My name is Uchiha Madara, and this is the face of Uchiha Vengeance. But you're wearing a mask? Toby was a fiction created the moment I was awoken by your Admiral Marcus to help him advance his cause, a smokescreen to conceal my true identity. My name is Uchiha Madara. Konoha doesn't even have a navy. My name is Uchiha Madara. Conjure by it at your own risk. What do you mean, conjure? I am Madara, son of Taijima, and I am called Elisar, the Elfstone, Dananan, the heir of Isildur, Elendil's son of Gondor. Here is the sword that was broken, and is forged again. Will you aid me or thwart me? Choose swiftly. What do all those names even mean? My name is Uchiha Madara, a prince of Dorne. Elia was my sister. You raped her. You murdered her. You killed her children. How dare you? I did no such thing. I am Uchiha Madara. Of Clan Uchiha. I know. Everybody knows. It's in the name, for Kamisake. I am Uchiha Madara, and you're standing in the biggest library in the universe. Look me up. We are standing in the middle of the forest. I am Uchiha Madara of Konoha. And you shall feel my wrath. Finally, Naruto and the Overpowered Academy 3, Chapter 10, The Fall of the Uchiha. For the third time, Naruto Uzumaki was enrolled in the first year of the Ninja Academy. And he was completely bored out of his mind. The material for the first year consisted of an introduction into the shinobi world combined with a regular civilian curriculum like math and writing and such, which meant that the first half of the year was mostly just theory, with some light physical activity thrown in. Mostly stuff like, how do you properly use a kunai, which eventually boiled down to Pokem with the pointy bit. Around the halfway point of the year, students would be taught how to unlock their chakra. Them still being children, this meant that their chakra pool wasn't really usable for anything yet, but it did allow the teachers to guide the students in getting a feel for their chakra, teaching them how to manipulate it using the hand seals they had learned previously. This would eventually culminate in one of the basic Academy 3, the Henge. Each year would focus on a single jutsu, with the students having to perform all 3 at their final exam. Unfortunately for Naruto, he had already listened to the material twice before whenever he wasn't ditching class, that is, had already unlocked his chakra, and his special henge was far superior to the ordinary henge the Academy taught. The physical portion of the Academy didn't really pose any serious challenge to him, except for spars with Uchiha Sasuke, who for some reason appeared to have taken Naruto's skill as a personal affront, and so his first year passed in a haze of boredom, furious spars with the Uchiha genius and running away from one irate Yumino Irika, who was most often the victim of the young Uzumaki's aforementioned boredom, because since Naruto was unable to go prank the ANBU with Lee under the guise of training, as Lee had been far too busy taking missions and training with his new team, he simply decided to apply his skills in class instead, such as confetti bombs in the drawers of Irika's new desk, or painting Irika's new desk a vibrant orange, or even destroying it on accident by throwing one Uchiha Sasuke through the window and subsequently the new desk during one of their more heated spars. Long story short, Irika had to go through an inordinate amount of desks, and was forced to use hair dye by the end of the year in order to disguise his early onset of graying. Outside of school, however, Naruto still trained with the Akimichi, trying to learn from them how to use his shape-shifting in combat. It was a slow-going process due to the difference in their respective abilities, and Naruto was still used to fighting with the bastardized version of the strong fist he had picked up under Guy's tutelage. During these training sessions, the Inuzuka were getting more and more involved as well, since they were the clan with the best senses in Konoha, barring the legendary eyes of the Hyuga and the bugs of the Aburame. But the former weren't really interested in joining these training sessions, and the latter were unable to share their form of combat with anyone not of their clan, and thus the ideal people to help train Naruto in using his new senses. This eventually led to a tighter bond between Naruto, Kiba, and Choji, who insisted on dragging his best friend Naro Shikamaru along as well. Whenever the four of them would be together, usually in the Akimichi compound or the Nara forest, Naruto and Kiba would engage in friendly rivalry, ranging from spars at the Akimichi, or hide and seekin at the Nara. Choji was happy to just sit there and bask in the friendly atmosphere, but Naruto had a knack for getting the rotund boy fired up and willing to jump in on the competition, which would inevitably mean that Shikamaru would be dragged along as well. Choji and Shikamaru would always end up teaming up against Naruto and Kiba, and though both feral boys were undisputedly the better combatants of the four, with Naruto's greater chakra and more advanced taijutsu and Kiba's combos with his partner Akamaru, their matchups ended up in draws more often than not. Shikamaru's sheer genius and excellent companion to Choji's natural strength, which was already higher than that of Naruto and Kiba, which as part of the physically strongest clan in Konoha, would persist well into adulthood. In response to Shikamaru's excellent tactics driving him and Kiba into Choji's enlarged hands, Naruto let his prankster spirit out, circumventing the young Nara's careful strategies with sheer unpredictability and sneakiness. Initially taken off guard by the switch in tactics, Shikamaru quickly began adapting to the blonde's unorthodox way of thinking, his own mind becoming far more flexible and alert than it otherwise would have been, which combined with his raw intelligence made for a scary combo. For a while, everything was right with the world, the bonds between the next generation of Konoha's warriors growing ever stronger, their skills increasing day by day. Everyone was content with the exception of Iruka, of course, though the company that sold him their desks were over the moon, and so it didn't come as a surprise to the older and more cynical generation when in a single night, this peace and happiness was shattered beyond repair. Because in one night, the Uchiha massacre took place. Silhouetted in darkness, a cloaked figure waited patiently underneath one of the giant Hashirama trees, waiting for his contact to finally arrive. There was no doubt in the unknown person's mind that his companion would show up at the agreed-upon time. There was too much at stake, too much already set in place, to back out now. Finally, the stranger's patience was rewarded when a slim figure dropped down in front of him in the small clearing underneath the ancient trees. "So, you decided to come after all, Uchiha Itachi?" The figure spoke up in a leisurely tone, though his voice had an undercurrent of malice to it. The small figure straightened itself to reveal that it indeed was young Itachi, dressed in his A&B gear. Despite who his companion claimed to be, and the grim task they had before them this night, his pale face didn't betray any emotion at all, his eyes settling coolly on the robed figure in front of him. "Of course I came. It isn't like I truly had a choice in the matter, do I?" The stranger chuckled, but it was a sound of cruelty, not amusement, as he stepped out of the shade of the trees, allowing the moonlight to illuminate the mask he wore. "In the grand scheme of things, do any of us?" Walking past the younger Uchiha without even looking back, the man who claimed to be Uchiha Madara made his way towards where the Uchiha compound laid, its inhabitants unaware of the terrible fate that was about to befall them. "Come then, young Itachi. Let us bring peace to the world." Itachi stood rigidly alone in the clearing for a moment, before he closed his eyes in acceptance. The prodigy then turned on his heel, and followed his older clan member towards his home, ready to commit acts that would doom his soul for eternity. They approached the walls of the compound without being noticed by the clan's monitoring system, Itachi having been trained in avoiding them by his father and the stranger. Well, he might not be who he claimed to be, but if he had been in contact with the real Uchiha Madara, then there was a pretty big chance that there wasn't a single Uchiha secret the man didn't know about. The high wall surrounded the wall was heavily guarded, as it had been for the past few months, the security gradually increasing ever since tensions had begun to rise within the village from the moment the rumor had spread that the Uchiha had been responsible for all of the death and destruction the rampage of the Kyuubi had caused. This was it, the moment of no return. The moment Uchiha Itachi would forever be branded the worst traitor the elemental nations had ever seen in its violent and blood-filled history. For the village. For Konoha. For Sasuke. Itachi thought to himself, as he drew his tanto. Next to him, he could feel the chakra of the stranger flex as he bent at the knees. Then as one, they cleared the tens of feet separating them from the wall in a single bound, landing on the ramparts with nothing more than the rustle of cloth and the spinning of their Sharingan. The guards never stood a chance. As Itachi's blade flashed through the night, spilling the blood of his family with every stroke, the impostor went on an offensive of his own, kunai finding their mark unerringly, while each hastily executed counterattack simply missed, even as they passed straight through his body. It took all of 3 minutes to clear their part of the wall, leaving only corpses in their wake. As Itachi glanced away from his fallen clan members, he didn't feel any guilt or remorse. He didn't feel anything at all. Feeling would come later, when this night and Konoha itself were far behind him, when he could crumble apart in private. Our element of surprise is waning. This little scuffle won't go completely unnoticed. Let's get a move on, the unknown Uchiha said in an even tone. Without waiting for a reply, the impostor sprung forwards, landing on the roof of a 2-story house, before making his way inside. Itachi didn't need his excellent senses to know that the inhabitants, be they man, woman, or child, were already as good as dead the moment the murderous Uchiha set foot in their home. At least, that was what he expected, until the upper floor of the house exploded, the man calling himself Uchiha Madara jumping away from the destruction without so much as a scratch. Landing next to Itachi in a crouch, the villain tilted his head in curiosity. Well, this certainly is unexpected. Standing in the ruined wall of the house of some unwitting Uchiha family stood a squad of A and B operatives, some of them already sporting some gruesome wounds, while Itachi's Sharingan spotted a couple of their team members lying in pools of blood behind them. No, not A and B. They are Root. Itachi wondered to himself, caught off guard by this new development. What is the meaning of this? Thundered a voice above the ruckus, as the rest of the Uchiha compound stirred awake, people coming out of their houses looking disheveled and half asleep, but instinctively brandishing their weapons. Itachi glanced at the speaker, recognizing him as one of his great-uncles, and one of the most vehement supporters of the coup. The answer came from an unexpected source, being so out of place it even caught the Madara imposter off guard. Quite some time ago, the Hokage uncovered rumors and whispers that Madara wasn't quite as dead as everybody believed. In response to this threat, I was tasked with creating an elite A and BU team, codenamed Root, to hunt these rumors down, and if they proved to be true, eliminate their source. Though we didn't receive any intel that Uchiha Madara had taken on an apprentice. The dry voice of Shimura Danzo called out, as the ancient warhawk shuffled out from behind his operatives, his cane striking the floor with every step. Itachi's mind raced faster than the Hiraishin as he tried to understand this sudden shift in events. What is Root doing here? For that matter, what is Danzo doing here? Shursui is supposed to have him contained under Kodo Amatsukami. Of course. There's no way Danzo of all people would be so open with his intel and motivations. Shursui must still control him. So is that your plan, Hokage-sama? 3 birds with 1 stone? Have your traitorous advisor redeem himself by making it appear as if his private army was your doing all along. Then get rid of him and the traitorous Uchiha, by having them fight a 3-way battle with the Madara imposter. But why imply that I'm aiding him? Itachi thought to himself, all of this passing through his mind in less time than it would take to blink. Next to him, the man claiming to be Madara straightened from his crouch, his posture still unbothered, despite facing a previously unknown hit squad and the waking of the Uchiha clan, though there hung an air of danger around him as he replied, So, Hiruzen's attack dog finally shows his true colors. But you should be thanking me, Shimura. I am doing you and Konoha a service this night. Don't tell me you were unaware of the traitorous ambition of those I once called family? Silence, you dog. You claim to be our family, but to us you are a stranger. Who are you to kill our clan members, and then speak of treason? Another elder of the Uchiha roared, unsheathing the katana that hung from his belt even as his Sharingan swirled into life. The masked man turned his gaze on the elder who had spoken, the air filling with potent killing intent as his voice dripped with malice. Dog, you call me. But what does that make you, I wonder? Aren't you all dogs, snapping at your chains in the end? But you forgot who's holding the leash, and now his right hand has come to strike you down. The Madara growled out, as the air itself was ripped apart in a swirling vortex of nothingness, the impostor sticking his arm into the distortion without hesitation, before retrieving a katana of his own. Cold sweat dripped down Itachi's back as he saw several Uchiha glare suspiciously at Shimura and his operatives, though his face betrayed no emotion. And why should I believe a word you say? Between the two of you, it is you who is covered in the blood of my kin. And you appear to have even turned my son against us. No, whatever Shimura's reasons and purpose for being here are, they can be discussed at a later point. Now, however, a hard voice cut through the din of the assembled Uchiha and Root operatives. Itachi couldn't stop himself from tightening his grip on his tanto as his father strode through their assembled clansmen, already fully dressed and looking both alert and dangerous, his Sharingan blazing in the dimness of the night. Now you die. Both of you. And with those words, the battle had begun. Itachi's father jumped at him with incredible speed, his katana leading the way, glinting in the light of the jutsu already being thrown around by the other combatants. It was only Itachi's own Sharingan and prodigious skill that allowed him to catch the tip of his father's sword on the flat of his blade, through the sheer force of Fugaku's attack cleared them both over the walls surrounding the compound and carried them deep into the woods of Konoha. While still in midair, Fugaku managed to close in on his son and put more pressure on his blade, before violently swinging his blade, slamming Itachi away from him, though the young Uchiha managed to right himself and land on his feet, though his sandals tore deep furrows through the underbrush. Even as he settled into a defensive stance, Itachi's dojutsu managed to pick up minuscule cracks in his tanto, and the young Anbu knew that his blade wouldn't survive another clash with his father. Said father landed in the small clearing opposite his son, his expression stern but his breathing still even. For a moment, father and son simply gazed into each other's Sharingan, neither one even moving a muscle, as the wind blew a few stray leaves in their path, the only sound being the screams of the wounded and the dying from the direction of the compound. Even though Itachi didn't show it, he was a jumble of nerves on the inside. His father was strong, ridiculously so. He was considered as a candidate for the position of Hokage, with his opponents being the Yellow Flash and one of the Sannin. That's how powerful his old man was, and he had just committed high treason. Suddenly, Fugaku lowered his sword, his form suddenly slumping as if exhausted, his voice filled with weariness and pain. So, what's going on, Itachi? Why are Uchiha Madara and Shimura Danzo duking it out in my clan compound? And why is the blood of our kin staining your blade? What has that madman promised you? What do you get out of it? All of this, just for the Mangekyo Sharingan perhaps? His father asked, and more than anything, the defeated tone in the clan head's voice broke Itachi's heart. No. I'm doing this for Konoha. The Uchiha coup cannot be allowed to come to pass. It would mean civil war for Konoha, and eventually total war for the entire world. I have to stop it, even if it means that I have to kill those dear to me. I will make sure Sasuke will never have to look at a mountain of corpses as I was forced to do, Itachi whispered, a tear streaking down his cheek. His father's hand tightened on the hilt of his katana, the creak of leather filling the air between them, and for a moment, Itachi feared that his father would strike him down then and there. And the innocence in all of this. What of the children? The elderly? Would you cut them down too? How much is your peace worth, if it is won on the backs of those who had no stake in all of this? Isn't what you're doing right now planting a mountain of corpses at your brother's feet as well? His father wasn't shouting, but that just made it worse. Each statement, each word, hammered into Itachi with the force of one of Tsunade's famed punches, and the young Itachi almost buckled under the furious and desperate look Fugaku sent at him. I had no choice. This was the only option. I didn't want it to be this way. I didn't. It was just supposed to be the leaders of the coup, the rest. The rest would be free to pick up their lives. The clan would come to Konoha for protection, Sasuke. Sasuke would grow up in a time of peace. Trust me when I say this, son, your brother will never know peace again. Not after tonight. Not after what you have done. Not after what you must still do. Those words finally shattered Itachi's resolve, and he sunk to his knees, tears freely flowing from his eyes. Then what should I do? What can I do? Either Madara will slay you all, or the Uchiha will rise up against Konoha and they will destroy each other in turn. Itachi sobbed, his fists clenched in frustration. You must carry out your original plan. Itachi's head whipped up in shock, his mouth falling open as he gaped at his father, the clan head standing tall once more, though his eyes showed a bone-crushing sadness. What? Itachi whispered, but his father plowed on. Madara will not stop at simply eliminating the leaders of the coup. If he gets his way, the entire clan will be wiped off the map. However, Shimura and his so-called root will buy us enough time to evacuate the innocent. The rest of us, we shall face Madara and die in battle. We shall pass away from this world with our honor, and our children will know peace, not war. Fugaku said, his voice unwavering as he sentenced himself and his comrades to their deaths. But Itachi started to say, but cut himself off. What could he say, really? This was honestly the best result that Konoha could hope for. Both of its traitorous elements eliminated, driving away a third threat. It had to be this way. You shall fight by Madara's side. Do not bother with the root operatives. I know that they aren't what they claim to be. My best guess is that they are Danzo's personal killers, but that hardly matters anymore. If I know Hiruzen, and I'd like to think that I do, then he'll have some way of knowing when those complicit of the coup have been eliminated, and swoop in to save the others. It's your task to slay the would-be traitors, so that reinforcements can arrive and drive Madara away, safeguarding the remaining Uchiha. Do you understand, Itachi? Tears falling to the ground, Itachi closed his eyes, grit his teeth, and bowed his head to his father. Yes, good. Now, you cannot hope to overcome all of the members of the coup with your current power, and if you survive this night, then you'll need to be able to stand on even footing with monsters such as Madara. Your eyes aren't capable of that. Mine are. Itachi's head snapped up again, his words dying in his throat as his father plucked out his own eyes without so much as a flinch in his movements, or a hitch in his speech. I don't know how much you know about the next stage of the Sharingan, the Mangekyo, and its superior form, the Eternal Mangekyo, and there's no time to explain it all. But take these eyes, and make their power your own. You are going to need it, Fugaku said, as he held his eyes towards his son. Itachi hesitated only for a few seconds, before plucking out one of his eyes. The pain was easily shunted away, though the loss of half of his field of vision was jarring. Sealing his eye away, he quickly took one of his father's eyes and implanted it in his empty socket, applying healing chakra as best he could, before repeating the process with his other eye. He could tell he would need to get a professional medic to look at his eyes properly, but for now, his patch-up job would simply have to do. Already he could feel new power filling him as he looked at his blinded father with his new eyes. Have you implanted my eyes? Fugaku asked sternly, and gave a nod as Itachi answered in the positive. Very well. Activate the Mangekyo form, and memorize every name I give you. This new form of the Sharingan will grant you perfect recall, so I will not have to repeat myself. They are members of the coup, and need to be eliminated. Only then can reinforcements arrive, do you understand? Once more, Itachi answered in the positive, shunting chakra towards his eyes as he did so. Briefly, his eyes flared up in pain, before the world shifted into a far greater clarity than he could have ever been able to imagine as blood ran down his cheeks. His father started to rattle of names, urgency slipping into his speech as the sound of battle grew more intense, great pillars of flame illuminating the night sky. They had already lingered for too long. Uchiha Yashiro, Uchiha Tekka, and finally Uchiha Mikoto and Uchiha Fugaku. It was as someone had dropped a bucket of ice water into his veins, but all that Itachi could do was accept his new mission. Do you recall every name? Yes. Itachi whispered. Can you identify every name? Yes. Itachi whispered again, unable to keep his voice from shaking. Then I hereby give you your final mission as head of clan Uchiha Itachi. Kill every single person I have named. Do you accept? Why yes. Itachi chalked out. A large hand clamped on his shoulder, and his father's voice softly smoothed his troubled mind. I wish it would have gone differently, my son. I truly do. Keep an eye on Sasuke. He will struggle dealing with all of this. Anyone would. I understand, father. I will. I promise. And with those words, Itachi drove his tanto through his father's heart. Fugaku stiffened, before giving a weary sigh, slowly falling towards the ground, leaving his son standing in the small clearing by himself, tears of blood marring his cheeks. Itachi sobbed once. Only once. Then he wiped his face with his sleeve, steeled his resolve and killed his heart, and made his way back towards the compound. His task was not yet done. With a leap, he crossed the high walls of the Uchiha estate and landed in hell. Fire raged everywhere, the Uchiha's easiest element springing eagerly to their defense but also destroying their home. The streets were filled with the corpses of both Root and Uchiha, and not all of them were of shinobi age. Itachi noticed, dragging his eyes away from the still form of a young woman trying to shield a small bloody bundle with her body even in death. Further down the street, a battle of epic proportions was taking place, as a group of Uchiha and Root operatives were giving it their all to destroy the figure flitting in between their midst, sometimes moving so fast even the Sharingan thought it to be teleportation. While the masked figure was still driving his opponent's back, felling an enemy with every swing of his sword, he hadn't come out of the battle entirely unscathed. Several patches of his wide robe burned and charred, and Itachi's new Sharingan managed to spot what appeared to be a hairline crack in the man's mask. So, you can be harmed. That means you can be killed. Good. Itachi thought coldly, before closing in on the battle with the fastest shunshin he had ever performed in his life, coming to a halt right in front of a charging Uchiha. The man wasn't all that older than Itachi was, and in a single glance with his Mangekyo Itachi noticed that he looked more scared than anything else. It didn't matter. His name was on the list. With a single swing upwards, Itachi's tanto cleft the young man in half, already moving on to his next victim before the man's body parts hit the floor. He had killed 5 of his clan members before someone caught on. It was one of his uncles, who knew how many times removed, and proud member of the Konoha military police, as evidenced by the jetty he expertly twirled around. The cop made to close in, but Itachi's Mangekyo pulsed once, and the man died screaming in a blaze of unquenchable black flames. Amaterasu. Itachi muttered before turning to look at his other clan members, many of whom shrunk away from his gaze. Madara landed beside him, his tone unnaturally light considering the situation. So, I see you have unlocked the next evolution of our eyes. Well, I suppose if there was ever a way to unlock them, tonight would be the time for it. We'll have to talk some more on it when this is all said and done. You and I have nothing to discuss. Itachi seethed through clenched teeth, But the stranger's retort turned the blood in his veins into ice. Of course we do. Quite a lot, in fact. Starting with the intriguing little fact that so far, you have yet to be attacked by a single of these so-called rude agents. The masked man said, his voice harsh and filled with hate. Itachi was spared a reply as both he and the cloaked figure dodged away from each other, the ground which they had occupied not even a second ago being blasted apart by gales of wind sharper than any ordinary sword. The moment the man claiming to be Madara landed on his feet once more, without having suffered any visible damage, he was attacked, a wind-laced kunai cutting straight through his form as if it weren't even there. That is quite some arrogance you have, if you think you have time to chat with me as your opponent. The aged voice of Shimura Danzo said, as he stood in front of the masked man in a crouch, wind kunai in hand and with an impressive scowl marring his bandaged face. The Madara simply shifted the grip on his bloodied katana as he regarded his enemy. Really? And why should I be cowed by having you as my opponent, Shimura Danzo? What have I to fear from a decrepit old man such as you? Danzo simply raised his eyebrow as he nodded at where he had slashed at the man's shoulder. I cut you, didn't I? The masked man looked at his shoulder in surprise, visibly taken off guard by the small rip in the rough material of his cloak, the cut showing all the signs of having been made with wind-natured chakra. A dark drop of blood welled up in the tear, before dripping over the cloak. Clearly you have some upper limit to how fast you can turn intangible. Let's test that limit, shall we? Danzo said coolly. The masked man didn't say anything, simply letting out a growl as he gripped his katana tighter, before closing in on Danzo, who made his own counterattack, and the battle was picked up once more. Meanwhile, Itachi was tearing through his clan members, his naturally greater talents elevated to even greater heights by the power of his new eyes. From all directions ninjutsu and genjutsu flew his way, but the genjutsu might as well be non-existent, and no ninjutsu could match up to the powers granted by his eyes. Everywhere he looked the world went up in ebony flames. Every time he gazed in his opponent's eyes when they tried to trap them with their dojutsu, they were left catatonic the moment he looked away, and his tanto claimed a life with every flash of its stained steel. Steadily, as his world burned down around him, his family's bodies cooling at his feet, he crossed the people of his list, one by one, until after what felt like an eternity only one was left. Uchiha Mikoto. His mother was covered in soot and ash, while behind her several people of varying ages were cowering behind her, only a few of them handling weapons and even fewer of them showing an active Sharingan. But they weren't his target. They were innocent of the foolishness and hate of the Uchiha who had stood behind the coup. Only his mother was left. Itachi. My son. Why? His mother sobbed, even as she kept her sword raised in his direction. His mother's tearful voice cut deeper than anything else he had experienced so far this hellish night, but he couldn't fall apart. Not yet. Where's Sasuke? His mother's eyes widened, before her face twisted in anger, as she snarled at her eldest son. I do not know what has happened to you, Itachi, but you will never get to Sasuke. Mother. Itachi's voice cut through his mother's tirade, cutting of whatever rightful rant she was about to unleash on him. Is he safe? His words seemed to take his mother aback, before she narrowed her eyes and studied his face. Her gaze rested on his newly gained Mangekyo, and he could see something in her expression shift, traces of horror, despair, and finally what seemed to be understanding. Finally she gave a stiff nod. Yes, that was all Itachi needed in order to clear the space between him and Mikoto faster than she was able to react. His tainted tanto raised to cut her down, as he had done with so many others this night. Before he could strike, however, they made eye contact. Tsukuyomi, colors inverted as the world fell away. With a sickening lurch, as if the entirety of existence had been yanked a few feet to the left, Itachi and his mother found themselves in another world, a red moon casting everything in a crimson hue. For a moment neither one said a word, letting the silence stretch out between them, before finally his mother spoke. So it is true then. Fugaku has sacrificed himself. Itachi was startled by the softly said statement, before allowing his shoulders to sag in defeat. How did you know? His mother gave a bitter chuckle, her voice brittle and her face showing only crushing despair. After about 20 years of marriage, one comes to recognize their husband's eyes, even when they're looking at you from someone else's face. And you and I both know that a battle between the two of you would be felt across the entirety of Konoha. And even if you were to emerge the victor, then you wouldn't be able to stand before me so unharmed as you are. I seriously doubt you'd be able to stand at all. So he gave up his eyes voluntarily, his mother explained, before she sank to her knees. Oh, Fugaku. Why? Why is all of this happening? Itachi. Please tell me what's going on. Mikoto cried, and across from her, her son's heart shattered in a million fragments. The coup had to be stopped, mother. The Uchiha are strong, yes, but to think the rest of Konoha is weak is the height of foolishness. We would never have been able to seize control without enormous amounts of bloodshed. Even if we were to emerge victorious from the ashes, we would never have the support of the citizens and the other clans. Konoha would be in a state of civil war, and the other nations would be all too eager to jump on our weakened village and pick off whatever scraps remained. I couldn't allow it. I wouldn't allow the hubris of the clan to doom Sasuke to a lifetime of war. Itachi explained, his voice filled with unshed tears. And this is better? The destruction of the Uchiha? You're dooming Sasuke all the same. His mother screamed at him, and Itachi reeled back as if he had been struck. For a moment, both didn't say anything, the only sound in Itachi's distorted world being the quiet sobbing of his mother. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Itachi softly whispered, but his mother heard him all the same and looked at him through watery eyes. At first, Shursui was supposed to convince you all to consider peace using his special jutsu. But then Danzo screwed everything up, and assassination became the only option. But only the supporters of the coup. The innocent would be spared, and allowed to grow up without the hatred of the older generations marring their views. But then someone calling himself Madara showed up and things became worse from there. Itachi explained, feeling some of the immeasurable weight lift off his chest as he confided about what happened to someone for the first time since he had been given his original assignment by the Hokage, what seemed like a lifetime ago now. His mother looked at him with wide eyes, her face covered in tear tracks, before she softly grabbed his sleeve and pulled him down so he was kneeling in front of her, looking at her at eye level. Tell me everything, and Itachi did. At first just about the events leading up to this hellish night, but soon he began to talk about anything that came to him, a waterfall of words as he spoke more during those hours than he had spoken his entire lifetime. He spoke about his fears and his dreams, about his regrets and insecurities. He spoke about Sasuke, and how he worried what would become of his beloved little brother. He spoke about Izumi, a girl whose mother was from the Uchiha clan and who he had started to develop feelings for. For hours and hours he spoke with his mother about everything that came to mind, Mikoto simply listening without interruption, eventually smiling softly as her eldest son bared his heart to her. But eventually Itachi trailed off, a desolate expression on his face. His mother caught on immediately. The jutsu is about to end, isn't it? Time between the Tsukuyomi and the real world doesn't flow the same, but it does flow. During the hours we have been talking, in the corresponding seconds in the real world my attack has continued its course. In about a minute in Tsukuyomi time, which would be less than half a second in the real world, you will have died, and this technique will fall apart. Itachi explained, grabbing his mother in a tight hug. I don't want this to end. Itachi whispered brokenly, feeling his mother hug him back. Neither do I, my son. But even the might of your genjutsu must yield to reality eventually. I wish things could have gone differently. Looking back, there were so many other paths we could have taken, so many what-ifs and could-have-beens. But the reality is that we didn't do any of those, and so we ended up here. Pulling back a bit, Mikoto took her son's face in her hands, her callous fingers gently caressing his wet cheeks. Know that I still love you, Itachi? I know your father never really showed it that much, but he too loved you very much, and both he and I are proud of your strength. No matter what road your life may end up taking, always remember that will never change. Do you understand, my son? Not trusting his voice, Itachi simply nodded, before burying his face in the crook of his mother's neck, sobbing as she gently rocked him back and forth. They sat there for a few precious moments, before cracks started to appear in the red-colored sky, rapidly spreading to encompass the entire world, before finally shattering into millions of pieces, leaving mother and son huddled together in a vast, unending whiteness. I love you, my son. And then the whiteness disappeared as reality rushed back in, and Itachi opened his eyes to see his tanto buried up to the hilt in his mother's chest. He glanced up at her face, only to see that life had already left her, though her face was surprisingly serene, without any of the pain or anguish it had shown mere seconds ago. Guiding his mother's body gently to the floor, Itachi saw a well-hidden root agent staring at him intently. Giving an almost imperceptible little nod, the Black Ops ninja made a hand seal, his chakra pulsing briefly, before the agent fled the scene. Not moments later, a massively thick and potent slammed down on the entirety of the clan compound. Turning to look around, Itachi saw a small army of ninjas standing at the burned-out gates, and in front of them, having shed the wide robes of his position and showing the ancient armor underneath, stood Sarutobi Hiruzen, somehow towering over every other ninja there, despite his small stature. Enma was already in his staff form in his hand, and the third Hokage's eyes glinted with steel and fury, though Itachi's superior eyes read another emotion: sadness and regret. Once more, the masked man landed next to Itachi, and though he didn't notice any wounds on the man, he did observe that Madara landed rather heavily, and his hearing picked up labored breathing from his companion. Well, it seems things just got interesting, didn't they? I think it's time that Konoha learned the meaning of pain once more. The impostor said menacingly as he straightened, before a swirling vortex began to appear in the midst of the assembled shinobi, before Madara was taken clear of his feet by Emma slamming in his abdomen. It was a credit to the man's strength that he didn't crumple into a pile of broken bones, instead flipping around in the air and managing to land on his feet, though he couldn't quite keep a grunt from escaping him. "Well done, young Hiruzen. That is the first clean hit someone has managed to land on me in a long time. How did you figure out how to do it?" the masked man said as he straightened once more, his voice steady. Enma retracted into a more manageable length as the third Hokage glared at the man, his chakra swirling around him with such intensity it doused the flames around him with its sheer pressure. "I did not earn the title of the professor just for nothing. I recognize that technique, Madara, and though I do not know for certain how you make yourself as intangible as a ghost, I do know that Kamui is an advanced enough technique that it is nearly impossible to keep another technique going alongside it. In short, you can either attack with it, or be in a ghost-like state, but not simultaneously," Hiruzen explained grimly, making sure to pitch his voice so his forces caught on as well. It might have been seen as spilling clan secrets under any other circumstance, but considering the threat of their opponent and the state of the Uchiha, it really didn't matter all that much. "And how do you know that my ghost state, as you put it, is not simply a result of my new state of being? After all, isn't it taught in your precious academy that I died long ago at the Valley of the End?" the masked man mocked, though Itachi could tell he was unnerved, since he made no move to attack, and his stance was that of someone ready to flee at a moment's notice. In response, Hiruzen smiled grimly. It was a terrifying sight. "If that were true, then I wouldn't have been able to hit you just now, wouldn't I?" For a moment, there hung a heavy silence, before Madara scoffed, and turned around. "What a clever monkey you have become, Hiruzen. But be warned, all of this is neither the beginning nor the end of my revenge on Konoha. You will know absolute despair, Hiruzen, and it shall be at my hands." The masked man threw over his shoulder as he began to walk away. "You think I'm just going to let you leave? After all that you have done here?" The third Hokage roared at the man's retreating back, making him pause in his stride. "Well, to be fair, young Hiruzen, you do have a history of simply standing there and letting traitors to the leaf run away," the man mocked, but the Hokage's reply was as fast as a whip. "Then you should also take note of the history of every traitor to the village opting to run away from me rather than face me in battle. Which now includes you." Madara stiffened at the verbal barb, before letting out a low growl, as a swirling vortex began to consume his form. A storm of jutsu and metal rained down on where his form had been moments ago, Enma slamming into the ground just before the man disappeared, before the dust settled, revealing that the traitor had managed to escape. Feeling the eyes of the assembled ninja settle on him, Itachi decided that it was time he left as well. While he would welcome death at this point, the hints that the masked man had dropped in their first conversation meant that his task was not yet done. An internal threat to Konoha had been taken care of this night. Now it was time to tackle a far more dangerous external threat. It was time to take up Madara's offer of joining Akatsuki. A towering wall of black flames sprang up between him and the small army come to kill him, but not before he had made eye contact with the third Hokage. There was nothing but sorrow and regret in the aged Sarutobi's eyes, before the leader gave the smallest of nods. Mission accomplished. And with that, Uchiha slinked away into the night, seeking out a man claiming to be the first traitor in Konoha's history, in order to join his world-threatening organization. It would be 5 years before he would ever set foot again in his home village. The Uchiha massacre shocked the entirety of Konoha. I'd like to say it shocked the world, but it was kept strictly under wraps by the Hokage, only allowing trickles of information to leak to the other villages. The only thing that the rest of the world knew was that there had been a descent in the ranks of the Uchiha, which left only most of the children and the elderly alive, and a small portion of their active shinobi. The other villages made two conclusions from this information. 1. The Uchiha, and Konoha by extension, were severely weakened after losing a sizable amount of able-bodied and above-averagely powerful warriors. 2. And this was far more unsettling, apparently there were individuals out there that were so ridiculously powerful that they were capable of wiping out the majority of one of the strongest clans on the continent. And Konoha was powerful enough to kill these individuals, or at least send them running, ever while still recovering of having a demon stomping around their village. So in the end, everybody decided to simply do nothing, though all eyes were now trained on the oldest hidden village, the rest of the nations holding their breath, wondering whether this meant the end of Konoha, or the birth of their next generation of monstrously powerful legendary warriors. Exactly as Hiruzen had hoped, the rest of Konoha was also shocked by the news of Shimura Danzo's death, who on his Hokage's orders had assembled a team of elite shinobi to track down, evaluate, and eliminate the threat of Uchiha Madara, who appeared to be still alive, despite having to be around 100 years old by now. Danzo had valiantly come to the Uchiha's defense, and had even engaged the legendary ninja in one-on-one combat, allowing the young and the elderly to be evacuated to safety. However, the wounds he had been dealt by the ancient Uchiha were too much, and when he had been found on the battlefield, he had just enough energy left for a private conversation with his old friend and rival, the third Hokage, kneeling in the dirt and bowed over the body of his advisor. Before the aged Sarutobi stood up and regretfully told the ninja present of the passing of the aged ninja. To Konoha's credit, its villagers were both outraged and shocked at the news of the Uchiha clan's near destruction, and in no time relief efforts had been set up, the traumatized remaining members of the clan being offered housing with the other clans and with even individual ninja and civilians alike opening their homes to the diminished dojutsu users. After several weeks of administrative whirlwinds and headaches, a new compound had been erected where there once used to be the Konoha's military police's headquarters, the task of the police having temporarily taken over by ANBU, there being too few Uchiha left to take the responsibility upon themselves. Not a single one was in any state to do any police work at any rate, though not one person blamed them. Already there were talks of filling the Uchiha's ranks with those of the other clans in order to get the police force up and running again. A cop with an Inuzuka for a partner, or a Hyuga, was a terrifying prospect for any criminal. Uchiha Shursui, by dint of being the most senior active duty ninja of his clan, was made interim clan head, having announced he would only hold the position until Uchiha Sasuke was of age and could take the position that was his by birth. The young Uchiha had been almost comatose for about a week after the massacre, the death of his parents at the hands of none other than his own brother almost crushing him with guilt. Through gentle guidance of Shursui and some of the elders, the young child was dragged out of his shell bit by bit, though Sasuke was forever changed. While he used to be a happy and rather carefree child before the massacre, he had now become a solemn and intense youth, determined to work himself to death so that he was worthy of leading his fellow Uchiha children, many of them orphaned as he was, and with nobody to really look up to. Entire days were spent either training, studying clan responsibilities and politics, and brooding over how he would avenge all the fallen members of his family. He would have burned himself out long before he had even graduated from the academy if it weren't for Naruto. One day, a few weeks after Sasuke had come back to school, Naruto and he were once again pitted against each other in a sparring match. While they had been rather evenly matched before, Naruto's greater experience and raw strength competing against Sasuke's natural genius, now they were rather one-sided, Sasuke attacking with a ferocity and intensity that Naruto, for all his rambunctiousness, was rather hesitant to match. However, after weeks having suddenly become the young Uchiha's stress relief, Naruto had had enough, and used what he had learned from Guy in order to give a solid beating to Sasuke, who returned the favor in equal measure, until they weren't so much sparring as simply rolling around on the ground trying to bash each other's skulls in. Surprisingly, it wasn't Iruka who jumped in, but Choji and Shikamaru, Choji's enlarged hands and Shikamaru's shadow pinning the combatants so they were separated. Both boys were panting heavily, staring intently at the other, completely ignoring Iruka's ranting as they studied each other's face. Finally it was Naruto who spoke up first, catching both Sasuke and Iruka off guard. "It's gonna be okay, you know?" Sasuke stiffened, before glaring at the blonde with a murderous expression. "I'm not saying it's gonna be okay now, or tomorrow or next week, or even next month. But eventually it will be okay. Eventually, the pain goes away." By now, Choji and Shikamaru released their hold on the combatants, as even Iruka fell silent, waiting for the raven-haired boy's answer. Sasuke seemed to struggle with finding his words, balling his hands into tight fists, the split skin on his knuckles beginning to tear open again. Finally Sasuke whispered his reply, refusing to look at anything other than the ground. How did you make your pain go away?" In response, Naruto walked up to the Uchiha legacy, clasping his shoulder with one of his bloodied hands, giving a smile which showed several teeth having been knocked loose. "You feel that pain, that emptiness. You fill it with friends," Naruto said, nodding his head to where Kiba, Shikamaru and Choji were watching them intently. "Friends, huh?" Sasuke muttered, following Naruto's gaze, before looking at the blonde again. "Yeah. Tell you what, after class, we were gonna go to the Akimichi for some training. Wanna come with?" For a moment, it seemed as if the Uchiha heir would decline, but then Sasuke recalled Shursui's face, and all those young Uchiha, who like him had lost so much, who had lost too much. Sasuke had every intention of restoring the clan to its former glory. He would make sure that his remaining family members would be part of something strong and mighty, not live like the charity cases they were now. He would wash away the stain of treason his brother had left on him by becoming the very best clan head anybody could ever hope for. This included political alliances. While Sasuke would much rather train on his own, he couldn't ignore the fact that he had just been invited to an informal gathering where the children of 3 clan heads would be present, and one of the few remaining Uzumaki. So in the end, Sasuke saw only one option. "Very well. I shall meet you all there." As time wore on, Sasuke found to his surprise that he enjoyed these training sessions more than he had expected. While Naruto and Kiba could be insufferable loudmouths, and the lack of ambition and drive in the Akimichi and the Nara boys could raise his hackles, he could not deny that training with them proved to be very beneficial. For all their brashness, Naruto was a genuinely strong opponent, his year under Guy and the Akimichi's tutelage leaving him with very decent taijutsu, especially for someone their age. And while Kiba might not be as much of a physical powerhouse like the Uzumaki, the feral boy had an undeniable edge whenever they decided to train in the Nara woods, his senses unmatched by any of the other boys. And while he and Choji didn't quite mesh, Sasuke occasionally found he enjoyed the rotund boy's steady presence, which sometimes proved to be rather soothing to Sasuke's frazzled nerves after a particularly bad day. And even though Shikamaru's laziness made his blood boil, Sasuke couldn't deny the Nara boy's sharp mind and clever wit, the genius capable of making up complicated strategies faster than Sasuke could blink. And so, when the first year of the academy ended, and all of them managed to perform the henge and advance to the next year, Sasuke, in the privacy of his own mind at least, admitted to himself that something had happened that he hadn't thought possible anymore a few months ago. He had made friends. Chapter 11 New Beginnings, Old Regrets. Sasuke grunted as he felt the air being forced from his lungs as he hit the ground with a painful smack. Coughing, the young Uchiha worked himself back to his feet, heaving great gulps of air, trying to regain his composure. Taking a deep breath, the raven-haired boy centered himself and slid back into the combat stance of his family. Again, standing across from him in a small clearing within the deep woods of the Nara clan, Naruto Uzumaki rubbed the back of his head in apprehension, a purple bruise blossoming on the left side of his face. When it came to prospective genin, Naruto's taijutsu was among the top 5, as his technique was above average, but his endurance, strength and experience were on a whole other level than those of his peers. Unfortunately, Sasuke Uchiha was another prospective genin in the top 5 in terms of strength and skill, and he made sure to remind Naruto of that every chance he got. You sure about this? You know how Shika gets when we ignore his scenarios so we can fight. Sasuke merely narrowed his onyx eyes, as he tensed his muscles in preparation of a fight. He knew the Uzumaki couldn't resist a test of his strength. Like himself, Naruto was filled with an ambition that ruled every waking moment of every hour. Please. You know that Inuzuka will have already sniffed out where the flag is and will be charging for it first. Akimichi will be on defense, as he always is. And Nara will probably stick around Akimichi, keeping an eye out on you and Inuzuka to make a break for the flag, looking for an opportunity to take you down. Really, I'm doing him a favor here. So, fight me. Conflicting emotions crossed Naruto's face as he tried to find a way around the Uchiha's arguments before giving up with an explosive sigh. While his grasp on tactics was high enough to have actually followed Sasuke's reasoning, thanks to Chose's patient and often violent teachings, he would always remain a scrapper at heart. He simply preferred fighting over thinking, he couldn't help it, sliding into his own stance, which was becoming more and more unique to himself as he started to combine both the Akimichi fighting style with Goken and even some moves he picked up from fighting Sasuke all the time. Naruto gave a determined nod to the boy in front of him. Bring it, Dadabayo. For a moment both combatants remained perfectly still, before they simultaneously shot off the ground at each other, fists cocked back in preparation of an epic clash. Tsuga, only to desperately dodge to the side at the very last moment, as what appeared to be the love child of a tornado and a missile slammed down in the middle of the clearing, throwing up dust and debris. Naruto and Sasuke both managed to land on their feet, shaken but not deterred as a dizzy Kiba stumbled from the grooved crater he made. Both children prepared to push off, intent on finishing their battle. Kagemain no Jutsu success. Buben Baika no Jutsu. Naruto glared down at his feet in shock, seeing their shadows stretch unnaturally back into the bushes, where he could see the shadowed form of Shikamaru hold up the rat sign. Sasuke meanwhile felt himself being engulfed by a hand that was about as large as his torso. He tried to squirm his way to freedom, but since his arms were pinned to his side he was unable to perform any ninjutsu. The hell Shika! Naruto yelled, as he strained to look over his shoulder, steadily drawing on his enormous chakra reserves, causing sweat to pool on the young Nara's brow as he struggled to contain the blonde Uzumaki. TCH. You know, Sasuke, you weren't all that far off with your deduction. But if you think we're getting predictable, then you really need to take a long, hard look in the mirror. I knew that if you and Naruto ran into each other, you simply couldn't resist to try and beat each other to a pulp. So I simply made it look as if your deduction was correct, before using Kiba's superior senses to double back and track you down. Sasuke stilled his struggles, though his onyx eyes flashed in irritation. Very clever, Nara. But you're talking as if you've already won. We all know that me and Naruto are the top combatants of our group. You've tracked us down, but can you defeat us before the chakra for your restraining techniques run out? The Uchiha coolly said, his eyes flicking to the struggling Naruto, whose skin had begun to give off a slight blue glow. Meeting eyes, the two rivals shared a smirk, and prepared for a whole different kind of fight. Hidden under the trees of his clan's forest, Shikamaru let out a bitter chuckle. Well, can't say you haven't gotten me by surprise there, Sasuke. You and Naruto teaming up? Guess we should be flattered. Apparently our skills have progressed enough that you see us as such a threat that you're willing to work together. You want to fight? Very well, then prepare to lose. And with that, Shikamaru burst from the undergrowth in a dead sprint. What the hell, Databayo? Forcing Naruto to run forwards as well. Choji caught on immediately, and threw Sasuke at the involuntary charging Uzumaki, while Shikamaru forced his arm up in a picture-perfect clothes swing. The tactic, having caught Naruto and Sasuke completely off guard, worked like a charm, and with a heavy smack, Naruto's arm caught Sasuke in the upper chest, slamming the young Uchiha into the ground. However, as the sprint and the sudden impact had cancelled the shadow imitation technique on Naruto, and Choji had released Sasuke from his partial multi-size technique, this meant that both boys were now free from their constraints, and they were itching for payback. Sasuke climbed to his feet, ignoring the additional bruise to his chest as he gathered shuriken and kunai in his hand, his skill with thrown weapons unequaled by all of his peers with the exception of some girl named Tenten. Naruto meanwhile simply loosened the control on his chakra, exploding in a blue-colored aura that whipped his clothes in a sudden wind, while his spiky hair stood on end. Cracking his knuckles and his neck, Naruto let out a challenging grin, showing off pointed canines. The grin was matched fang for fang by a recovered Kiba, having regained some of his chakra and overcome his dizziness, now flanked by Choji, who was desperately munching on some high-calorie sweets, and a tired-looking Shikamaru, though his eyes were flashing with plots and tactics, even as his hands settled once more in a rat seal. For a moment, the two impromptu teams stared at each other, before on some unseen sign, they all charged, jutsu being thrown around abundantly, while feet and fists clashed with meaty sounds, as they all yelled in exertion, and a great time was had by all. Here's what I don't get. What do you of all people don't get? Ha ha, look at that, the Uchiha made a joke. I think the end times missed their schedule and came a few millennia too early. Whatever Nara, just play already. Sitting in the cool shade of a tree in the middle of the playground of the academy, Shikamaru and Sasuke were seated in front of each other, a banged-up and well-worn travel-size ghost set placed between them. Sitting next to them, keeping one concealed eye on their game and another on the bug preening itself on his outstretched fingertips, sat Shino Aburame. The very definition of the silent type. Shikamaru had challenged the boy to a go match one day after Sasuke had been frustrated by one too many defeats, and had walked off in a huff, looking for Kiba or Naruto to get into a fight with. While Shikamaru and Shino had played their match, the three other boys getting into a four-way battle royal, having inadvertently caught up Choji in it when one of them accidentally kicked his bag of chips to the ground, then Nara managed to draw the quiet Aburame into conversation, discovering that the bug user was a very intelligent person and not nearly as creepy as everybody had made him and his clan out to be. After that day, where Shino had lost the match, of course, and all of the boys had lost the fight to an irate Irika, whose desk had been smashed once again, this time by Choji throwing Sasuke through it, Shino began to occasionally join them during recess, his quiet nature and fierce intelligence making him fit in with Shikamaru and Sasuke, whenever the latter boy got fed up by the loud mouths of their group. What is it that you do not get, Shikamaru-san? Why do I wish to know? Because I dislike being kept in suspense. Oh yeah, just a sec. Shikamaru replied, his eyes focused on the go board in front of him, before he moved his piece several paces with a nonchalant air, making Sasuke snort in disgust when he realized that he now lost the match in a few turns if he didn't come up with a counter-strategy immediately, forsaking his own attack in the process. Hiding a grin in order not to set off the prideful Uchiha, Shikamaru turned to Shino, ignoring Sasuke for now, who sat fuming at his side of the board, fervently murmuring to himself, well, the Sharingan copies every technique it sees, correct? At the mention of his clan's dojutsu, Sasuke's head shot up, the match forgotten for now. That is correct, Shino replied, and whatever technique the eye copies, the wielder can use with the same level as skill as the shinobi the technique was copied from, correct? Shino thought for a moment, before calmly nodding, though Sasuke's expression got more intense as he tried to figure out where the Nara was going with this. Well, here's what I don't get. Why don't they copy from each other? The Sharingan essentially removes the need to train a technique altogether. Just think about it. A single Uchiha comes across a pretty awesome technique on one of his missions and copies it. If he'd show it to all the Sharingan-wielding ninja of the clan, then the Uchiha as a whole gain a new technique and become stronger as a result. Or what about a ninja who has just awakened his Sharingan? Instead of wasting time teaching them ninjutsu, you can immediately jump to tactics by just showing him all of the techniques the Uchiha have amassed and have his ninjutsu training covered in like a day or something. Shino tilted his head, deep in thought, while Sasuke stared at Shikamaru as if the boy had just told him that the sky was actually purple. If this was implemented, the overall strength of the Uchiha would increase exponentially. Why? Because there would be no difference in strength, at least ninjutsu-wise, as they would all possess the skill of their strongest member. Every new addition to their forces would quickly be on the level of their strongest member, and if one Uchiha learns something new, they will all learn it. A sound strategy. Both boys turned to look at Sasuke, who still hadn't said a word, his eyes focused on something far away as he tried to wrap his head around what this could mean for his clan and its future. A sound strategy, indeed. You want us to do what? Shursui Uchiha stared in confusion at his future clan head, even as he held the position himself for now. His confusion was mirrored by the other Sharingan-wielding members of the Uchiha clan, having gathered in the practice yard on Sasuke's request. There were only around 20 people there, and of those 20, 8 were too old to be active duty at all, and 4 more were active shinobi, but only in supporting roles as they were simply too old or too young to be any use in live combat. Shursui's thoughts briefly flickered to the third Hokage, considering just how stupidly powerful the aged leader's life force and chakra must be for the man to be still considered among the most powerful ninja alive, even nearing the age of 70, which was almost twice as old as the average life expectancy for most ninja. His thoughts were inevitably brought back to consider the pitifully small group of ninja around him, and he couldn't quite shake the sheer guilt and despair that threatened to crush his very soul. So few of us are left. And it's all my fault, he admitted to himself, before he tried to steel his mind, which makes them my responsibility. I have brought this misery upon them, it's my duty to see them through it. I can collapse later, when Sasuke is strong enough to lead and protect them. Depression averted for now, Shursui turned his attention back to his best friend's younger brother, who stood tall before the disbelieving eyes of his clan members. The strongest of us will showcase all of their techniques, while everybody else will copy them. Following them, those of you who have techniques not yet shown will demonstrate them in turns, meaning that by the end of today, every single one of us will share the same knowledge. But why? One of the elder shinobi croaked. While Shursui knew that all of the ninja here were loyal to both him and Sasuke, as well as Konoha, they wouldn't be alive if they weren't, this blatant breach with tradition was still something they found difficult to swallow. Sasuke narrowed his eyes, and for a moment Shursui feared the boy would lose control of his volatile temper. Sasuke had been twisted by the massacre, more so than others, and had developed both a temper and a very short fuse in contrast with the sweet boy Shursui knew the child had once been. Sasuke, however, surprised everybody there when he let out a tired sigh. For all that he was but a child, Sasuke had still managed to build an image of strength around himself, the promise of a better and safer future for his clan, which had done much to ensure that he was still in line for clan head even after the kinslaying of his brother. He never tried to show weakness, not to anyone, so the drawn expression on his face and his sagging shoulders caught many of them off guard. It's because we are weak. Protests and assurances came from the assembled shinobi, but with a sharp gesture of his hand, Sasuke silenced them, much to the hidden envy of Shursui, who had often tried to do the same, with not nearly as impressive results. We are weak. We may wish that we weren't, we may delude ourselves into thinking that we still hold the power we once did, but the simple truth is that this is no longer the case. Not after tea that night. Much knowledge and skill was lost, and on top of that, a message was sent out to the world: the Uchiha are not invincible. Sasuke stared at his desperate-looking people with grim eyes as he continued, doing this will not only make most of you more powerful, it will also mean that whenever one of us doesn't make it back, that we don't lose any more power. We simply cannot afford it. On top of that, I will soon reach the age to unlock the Sharingan myself, and there are still the other Uchiha children. We cannot waste time being trained. We need to be able to approach whatever few members are available to us at any given time and be trained in all of the knowledge the Uchiha possess at once. Sasuke clapped his small hands, the sound still startling loud in the silenced yard. Now then, get to practicing. Do not limit it to just ninjutsu. Share any skills you think the Sharingan will allow you to share with your clan. We need to become more powerful, and fast. Good luck. With muttered agreements and thanks, the small crowd split up into groups and soon the yard was filled with jutsu, while the red of the Sharingan shone in the growing dusk, tomos spilling madly as the Uchiha made their first tentative steps into taking their clan towards a new, stronger and brighter future. Hiruzen sat at his desk, only illuminated by the light of the moon and the soft glow from his pipe, files and reports strewn haphazardly in front of him. The Hokage's eyes were however locked on something only he could see, as he puffed out clouds of smoke, deep in thought. Dismantling Danzo's route had been a major headache, simply because there was so much of it. Thankfully records were kept on the most basic of things, so stuff like tracking down and reassigning the route operatives was relatively easy, though their emotionally stunted nature made it a nightmare of its own to integrate them in such a way that they wouldn't raise any suspicion. But then there were all of Danzo's own secret little projects. Thankfully, the information pumping done by Shursui had not only given them the location of most of them as well as many of the security measures that had been used, but Hiruzen had still lost 3 men trying to recover them all. 3 men too many, in his opinion. Then there was also the fact that Danzo had been at this for a long time, ever since Hiruzen had become Hokage. In fact, trying to go back through all of the evidence, tracking down all the scars left upon the world, both within Konoha and without, was a near impossible task. For the 100th time that day, Hiruzen pinched the bridge of his nose, wishing he had never allowed Danzo free rein and leaving him with this mess, which in many cases were simply far too sensitive to really do anything with it, other than either storing it or destroying it. All of the Sharingan they had discovered, for instance. Sighing, Hiruzen cleaned his pipe, and grabbed his bag with tobacco, beginning to fill it once more as his eyes looked out over his moonlit with a faraway expression. Danzo. Damn you and damn your ambition. And damn me. For making you shoulder the darkness of the tree of Konoha alone. But I wished to be its leaves, to bask in the light, and didn't have the strength to stoop to the darkness as well, to be the roots that support the tree from the shadows. I guess we both thought that you did have the strength for that, but looking back. Yes, you were the roots, but of a tree of your own, Danzo. You weren't supporting Konoha, you were strangling it. As he lit his pipe with a small flame from his thumb that briefly illuminated his office, Hiruzen mused over his final meeting with his former advisor, and the man he had called, long ago, his friend. Hiruzen stared at the wall of black flames that cut off him and his army from the retreating back of the young Itachi Uchiha. He was pretty sure he was the only one that paid enough attention to see the boy's shoulders shaking, or notice the brief flash of tears as they fell to the ground. As he stood still, staring at the back of the promising young man whose future he had doomed, he absently noticed as the men around him found that nothing they did, not even the combined water jutsu of a dozen shinobi, could quench the flames the Kinslayer had summoned, though Hiruzen had already realized this. Amaterasu. So, you have evolved the cursed eyes from your clan then, young Itachi. Hiruzen thought to himself. Hokage-sama. Hokage-sama. It's Danzo, sir, we found him. Turning to look at the salamander mask, Hiruzen was only briefly taken off guard by the man waving 2 whole arms, before remembering that he had another ANBU take up the mask in order to quash any possible rumors about Konoha being short an ANBU commander. Making his way to where the faux salamander was standing, the Hokage's eyes landed on the mangled, bloodied form of the man responsible for much of this mess in the first place. Thank you, Salamander. Please get a medic, Shimura-san is in need of medical attention. All of them knew that Danzo was too far gone for medical help, even if Tsunade herself were willing to operate on him. They also all knew that even if this wasn't the case, Hiruzen wouldn't be sending for medical help anyways. So as the ANBU pretending to be Salamander sped away in a shunshin, Danzo couldn't help but give out a wet chuckle, knowing that wherever the ANBU was going, it certainly wouldn't be a hospital. Well then, Hiruzen, it seems you have won in the end. Using me and my route to attack Madara, instead of using your own men, while crippling the Uchiha forever. Well done, the traitor gasped out, his voice barely carrying to Hiruzen, who kneeled in the ash and dust next to him, bowing over the man, conveniently blocking the view of the steadily growing group of onlookers. Well, to be honest, I couldn't have done this if it weren't for you, said Hiruzen, his tone biting. I wouldn't have needed to do this as if it weren't for you, went unsaid, though Danzo's frown told him that his advisor had picked up on it nonetheless. Spitting out the blood that had flown into his mouth from his internal bleeding, Danzo glared at his former rival and friend, the strength of his will unbroken by the failing of his body. Hate me all you want, Hiruzen, but we are different sides to the same coin. Every action you have ever made, you did with the conviction that it was for the betterment of Konoha. I merely did the same. Hiruzen felt rage roar to life inside him, but his control slammed down on his massive chakra, yearning to lash out, while he carefully schooled his features in a cool expression. Forgive me for having trouble believing that you acted in the betterment of Konoha as I'm sitting in its burning remains and amongst its slain people. Danzo simply gritted his teeth, his hand grabbing the hem of Hiruzen's battle attire, dragging the Hokage closer as he lifted himself a little of the ground, desperately chalking out his final words to the only man he had ever considered a true equal. It doesn't matter whether you believe me or not, Hiruzen. I don't matter, you don't matter. Konoha is the only thing in this wretched world that matters. Amongst all of the death and destruction that this world of ours is filled with, it is Konoha that must survive, that must endure. I won't be there to do your dirty deeds anymore, Hiruzen. I won't be there to take the darkness within me, leading you to bask in the light. You must ensure the survival of our village, and to do that you will have to become both leaf and root. I don't care anymore how you'll lead the village, Hiruzen. I won't be around to judge anyway, but you must make sure that it endures. Can you do that, Hiruzen? Will you see to it that the generations to come will have a village to inherit, to be proud of, and to pass on to their generation? Speaking for so long and with such passion clearly took its toll on the badly injured advisor, and with a rattling breath, Danzo fell back to earth, his arm limply falling away from Hiruzen's clothes. For a single moment Hiruzen merely looked at his oldest friend, a single heartbeat stretched out into a lifetime, as he considered the man in front of him, all of their history together, how often they had clashed, especially in later years, but now also remembering the early years of their friendship, when Konoha was still the only hidden village in the world, and more a dream of the Senju brothers than reality, even as the first few clans settled down under their banner. A time before the war, when two boys of different clans managed to become friends, a time before one of them was chosen to become Hokage, while the other fell to jealousy and greed. Finally, Hiruzen gently clasped his former friend's hand and placed it upon Danzo's chest, looking in the elderly shinobi's eye with a saddened expression on his face. Yes. I promise. Briefly, Danzo's eye lit up before the man let out a deep sigh, and with an expression more peaceful than Hiruzen had ever seen on him, Shimura Danzo, leader of Root, passed away. Lifting his hand, Hiruzen softly closed the open eye of Danzo, before coming to his feet, surprised by the ache he felt inside his chest. Goodbye, old friend. Hiruzen sighed, before extinguishing his pipe, plunging himself and his office in darkness, only slightly lifted by the moon peeking out from behind the clouds that hung over the sleeping village of Konoha. Slowly he let his face drop in his hands, and for once, just this once, in the privacy of his office, Hiruzen caved in to the enormous weight of his position. As the nights slowly went by, one old man gave in to all his regrets and mistakes he had made over the course of his long life, unwilling to face sleep and the dreams and monsters that it brought along with it. Thanks a ton for watching, Shinobi Squad. I hope you had as much fun as I did putting this epic what if together. Make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a single twist in the story. Drop your thoughts, theories, or even wild ideas in the comments. I read every single one. And hey, if you're craving more awesome Naruto content, go check out the other videos on the channel. I've got plenty of heat waiting for you. Until next time, stay sharp, stay awesome, and remember, even a shadow clone needs love. Peace out, Shinobi.